This video talks about some controversial and potentially triggering topics. Viewer discretion is advised. Not really sure how to open a video like this, but it's something that needs to be discussed, so I guess I'll go with my gut. Well, now that I'm done with my worst of the year, where I had a whole spiel about how drama is heavy and we need to bring back fun into the community, let's talk about drama in the slideshow commentary community. From the end of November going into the early weeks of December, I started going through an incredibly rougher patch than normal, being dragged into the ER and then following that up with my computer just dying on me. So I was gone roughly 3 weeks straight with an incredibly brief reprieve between surgery and tech problems. The general point is, I was gone and couldn't deal with anything. I was hoping fires didn't break out, but frankly it seemed like while I was gone, that was all that was happening. And I couldn't really do much to control those fires and make sure things either didn't go out of control, or at the very least, couldn't diffuse any situation that wound up with our community losing more of its members to frankly idiotic behaviors. So here we are. In this video, I'm going to wind up pulling back the curtains a bit and talking about the messier parts of the SCC, because I feel like this is really important to organize and to address before everything winds up getting so out of hand that it becomes a problem later. The SCC has kind of always, but especially recently, had a bit of a communication problem. Mind you, I do think we are better off nowadays than we were when I first joined the community in 2016, but frankly that bar isn't exactly super high. Because when I joined the community, it was super fractured and clicked up between commentary groups. It was kind of hard to make any friends if you weren't a part of the cool kids clubs, and so communication was practically impossible. Nowadays, we're a lot more tight-knit as a community, and with additions in the form of the SCC Nexus, a chat that I made to be a hub for SCC members, and the SCC Courthouse, where we go talk about our issues with each other, you'd think that we'd have a much easier time not having these moments of giant explosions. And I'd say to a very small degree you'd be right, but in the long run, we still have a long way to go. It's not enough to just be able to talk things out. You need to be able to listen, you need to be able to understand, you need to be able to deal with problem solving. Try not to get wrapped up in emotions when they're not productive, and be able to properly convey them when they are. As commentators, we should already have at least some of these skills to some degree. I ain't saying we need to be perfect. A lot of us are still in our late teens to early adulthood, and while I don't mean for this to sound offensive, a lot of the slideshow commentary community is on the spectrum, so there is probably a bit of a barrier there. Who knows? But I believe if you're able to articulate an argument against why someone's overrated list is bad, you should be able to articulate within a conversation about why you're uncomfortable with, say, someone being okay with someone else who groomed minors. I don't know, maybe I'm being ableist, but in any case, it's pretty important to acknowledge that there's importance to communication, and even if you yourself have problems going to someone about your problems, it's still vital that you try to talk to someone you can trust about them. This brings me to my newest position in the SCC, being the head of Courthouse and Nexus. I've wound up gathering the role of problem solver, which I suppose I don't mind to an extent. I have a couple of other commentators who are also able to help me with that role if need be, and we have been the problem solvers for a handful of situations within the community that frankly don't really need to be elaborated on just at this moment. There'll probably be stories for much further in the future. The point is, I have been able to handle this position. Problem is, during these weeks, my mods and I were all MIA for a bit. What I'm going to detail in the bulk of this video are events that happened in late November of 2023 going into early to mid-December 2023, a time where I had the aforementioned events talked about at the beginning of this segment, as well as another one of my Courthouse mods, Jace, was dealing with a home emergency, and Stag, my other Courthouse mod, was in the middle of a mental health break that he was taking for a handful of months by that point. So, during this time, if there was a problem in the SCC, they needed to deal with it on their own. And as you can guess, given I am making this video, I wasn't the most impressed with the state that I was left with coming back. I want specifically those within the community to hear this video. This is directed specifically at you because you are the people who need to hear these messages the most. I know I'll be naming names some of y'all don't want to hear, but I need to stress the importance of this, and censoring names like calling Keyblade Evil 911 or whatever honestly garbage nicknames you've come up with isn't going to get the point across nearly as well. I would seriously much rather Locker Boy instead anyway. I mean, Evil 911, what the hell? That is like the worst goddamn nickname. So I'll put up the content warnings for you guys, but genuinely we do need to talk about this. So please, if you'll indulge me, let's begin. And the rest of y'all are also free to take notes if you want. So, before we get into the things that I've missed, let's talk a bit about the context leading up to the store. So, V Omega is a particularly controversial ex-member of the SCC who is known for his antagonistic behavior, his defense of zoophiles, grooming minors, and being an attempted rapist. He was ousted from the community in 2020 once we learned of these behaviors, and ever since then his name has unfortunately plagued our community. Most of us obviously do not want V around ever again. However, we found out that another now ex-SCC member known as Vigelcio didn't seem to share that sentiment, keeping V around for roughly 3 years. Now, some of us in the Cloud Palace, a group where Vigelcio resided, that had some of V's victims in it, mind you, knew of this information, and instead of telling us that this was the case, kept it under wraps. We got up in arms over it, and thus 7 hours worth of content was released in the form of 2 Cloak and Dagger videos, which makes this video effectively now the 3rd one if you need to look at it in that way. In the first video, we saw the removal of users Bummer Patrol, Map Station, Neko Shadows, and Blazin' Hope, also known as Tippy, those who kept the friendship a secret. We also saw the removal of a user known as Keyblade Master, whose attempt at retribution left a vindictive and malicious mark on his reputation. All he had to do was keep his mouth shut. More on him later, though. Then, the second video was a more elaborated on extension of the story where Tippy Key and their friends retaliated to the existence of the first video, where some of the more inner workings of the Cloud Palace were more brought to the public, problems with how we treated our members in their time of grief, how much we let more annoying or problematic behavior slide because we didn't think of them as all that harmful. We saw people ready to defend the group that was ostracized and refused to listen to any form of reason when sat down to be discussed. And I would have thought that, maybe having this dirty laundry aired out as much as it was, that people would realize the problems with how my group communicated and would be more willing to sit down with each other and talk things out. However, it appears that maybe people like Vigil, Key, and Tippy were bad examples. And I guess I get it. I probably should have figured that they would be, given when you really break down the issue the 3 of them had, they are admittedly on the more extreme side of things. Vigil was a coward, is a coward even, because when V was faced with accusations of grooming, Vigil didn't want to hear that side, and at the time actively villainized those who came out about their stories of V's abusive behavior. That's why he stayed friends with V for as long as he did. He didn't want to face the music, didn't want to be confronted with the likelihood that his friend was a horrible and irredeemable person. He wanted to grip onto that fantasy and, well, now look at where we're at with him. He was confronted about his continued alliance with V, and instead of wanting to discuss it further, ran away before any confrontation could occur, which isn't exactly an applicable problem to every situation. Plus, I guess that it is a bit hard to make such a point stick with people anyway when Vigelcio got it off easy, especially when paired with Key and Tippy. Though, what else could we say about Vigil, other than that he might have been a creep himself, as indicated by the testimony of a user by the name of Dual Taku?
Okay, so Taku wanted me to go ahead and set up a call with you because he wanted to clarify some things about the comment that he left in the Cloak and Dagger video.
Sure.
Which I know this might not be the this might not be the best thing to say, but I can't watch the final half of that video without a very strange look on my face. I'm not going to elaborate further. No, but just I kind of assumed, like, I know MTR mentioned to you that, mentioned what I said.
Yeah,
apparently,
and, apparently Vigil was going around saying creepy things to you or something? Like, wanted to non-con or... I have to go back and look at the comment again, but...
If it's alright with the both of you, I have the comment up. I can read it if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Taku went ahead and said, I should have probably seen the signs about Vigil when he once said that apparently Taku could rape Vigil if Taku wanted to when Taku was 17.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and and I mentioned this to MTR like a few minutes ago. Like, this was back when I was in high school, so, uh, fuck. No, the issue is I don't know, cause like, there's like a chance he could have said this like before or like right after, cause I know this happened, cause I'm pretty confident this happened like right before my birthday that year. I could.
Can we know what your birthday was for clarification?
It's May 10th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if it was around then or like before then, like, because I don't think it was on the my birth. I was after that, because I don't. I think a point. No, I think because I was working on a video with Mav at the time on one of Guru's I think one video Guru did about the CC.
Oh yeah, this.
And I think like.
Sorry, don't mind me.
Yeah, no, I don't actually. I don't fucking remember the video, so I don't really care. But no, that went down. And I think it was around that time because I was like relatively cordial with him and V at the time. But yeah, no, that's what he said to me.
It's frankly unfortunate that we only have the one testimony. I figure maybe more could have been said about Vigil and V likely having similar interests in kids or otherwise befriended each other through their mutual disgusting behavior, but who knows? It could be that Taku's testimony was an isolated incident. It's still not particularly great, but maybe it was just that one time. Though it also could be far worse, and we just wouldn't know either given the sparsity of information on Vigil. Either way, Vigil's want to keep V around would allow V an indirect connection to the rest of the Cloud Palace, and worse yet, some of V's victims. We also don't know the full extent of communication those two had. We don't have any DMs between the two of them. We don't know of any voice calls they had, so we don't know how much information Vigil had been giving to V for the 3 extra years he was allowed in there. It's genuinely a terrifying thought when you sit down and actually consider the possibility of how much info was given to someone who should not have that info. It's even scarier when you consider how recently it was that V tried to come back. In my video on Neko Koda, I talk about V's return under an account titled the Alt-CC, who showed up in 2022 to target the likes of Studio Needing More and Justice Sylveon, 2 individuals who had been harassing me for over a year by that point. Why would V know of any of this unless he was either A, still lurking around the SCC, or B, being fed info by someone who was there while it was happening? I really want that to sit in with those in the community, because y'all are the ones that this affects the most. Vigil was not only in the Cloud Palace, you know, he was in a few commentary groups. Purely Odd Grandmasters, or POG for short, has far more minors in it. Hell, it's run by Umbrus, who only turned 18 in 2023, so the importance of not having that connection is vital. V also came back in 2022 to target his previous victim Neko Koda, so we know that he's not above continuing to victimize those who he genuinely traumatized when given the opportunity. By the way, in case anyone's wondering, yeah, it did indeed bug me how easily Vigelsio got away with all of this. I wish I could talk more about his endangerment and toxic attitudes. I wish I could have held him more accountable. But given how quickly he ran away with his tail between his legs, there was kind of nothing more I could talk about. But this isn't just an oopsie-daisy issue. This is a matter of people being endangered by the inaction of others. An issue that's going to come up all video because it shows that no one paid attention to that part, it seemed. Then you had Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Tippy was, to put it bluntly, an impulsive liar. Not only was Tippy caught lying at various moments within the Cloak and Dagger duology, she was caught blatantly lying to Lio about her intention of keeping Vigil and V's friendship a secret. Actually, on that note, hey, Lyo, did you know that Tippy actually lied to you in that call?
Repeat that?
Because I noticed after the fact. So, Tippy, you claimed that you wanted to help Vigil cut ties with V.
Yes.
But in the Cloud Palace, you claimed that you didn't know the extent of your of Vigil's friendship with V. So which one is it?
I didn't know about the things that he's done more specifically.
What do you mean you didn't
You
know
don't
the
know the
things he's
things
done
that-
specifically?
The things that
didn't
V
know
did or the things that Vigil did?
the things that Vigil did.
That doesn't matter. You claimed you wanted to help Vigil cut ties with V, but then you claimed that you didn't know the extent of Vigil's friendship with V. Which one is it? Speak!
Excuse me. I would
Use
lean
your
more
big
for the
girl
form.
words.
Don't you
The
say
former,
you delete
okay.
to it. You will answer it directly.
The things that Vigil did.
That's
That's
not the
the-
important part. Okay, let me break it down then. You said you wanted to help Vigil cut ties with V. You wanted to get Vigil away with V. That is what you claimed in the call. But in the Cloud Palace, when this whole conversation started, you claimed that you didn't know the extent of Vigil's friendship with V. That you didn't know that Vigil was as close of a friend to V as he was. But you wanted to help Vigil cut ties with this person that he was quite clearly very friendly with by your own admission.
Okay, now
So
I
which
realize
one
that this
is it, Tippy?
I just realized that that's like an inconsistency on my part.
You
Just-
now
Yes,
realize?
so
Are you
which
fucking
one?
kidding me?
So
You're a
which one is it? Hold on. So which one is it, Michelle?
I don't have a clear answer, unfortunately.
What do you mean?
She was caught lying about not knowing of Keyblade Master's behavior before going into the Senate call. By the way, to the surprise of fucking nobody, Tippy straight up lied about not knowing about Key's behavior prior to the Senate call, because Ellie sent me these little screenies that she got from before the Senate call happened. Should've called Tippy out about it in the call, but I was so fed up and done with these three goons that it didn't come to mind. She was even caught lying about what happened during her removal of the Cloud Palace, thanks to the testimony of someone in POG.
So, ex-commentator Tippy, aka Blazin' Hope, not only covered up how other ex-commentator Vigil CO was friends with another ex-commentator and known child groomer V Omega, and covered that up for 2 years, but also told reviewer The Absolute Degenerate not to tell anyone about Vigil and V's friendship, essentially silencing someone who wanted to out the friend of an incredibly dangerous person, though the latter claim has no real evidence behind it, so take it with a grain of salt if you must. She was rightfully chewed out during a call in a server called the Commentary Courthouse, and immediately after a courthouse call, she came to a commentary group I am in called Purely Odd Grandmasters to cry her eyes out for literal hours on end. Emotional manipulation at its finest, acting as if she was the victim, and most importantly, essentially saying that she was being harassed. This was before Doodle's video clarifying the situation came out, so like the fool I was, I genuinely thought that she was being harassed, though she eventually said in the Senate call that nothing like that actually happened. You made me feel bad over nothing. You had me stressed for nothing. I genuinely thought that he harassed you or something, but she didn't. No one did. I felt bad for you then. I don't feel bad for you now.
Tippy could not be trusted and furthered that behavior even after her removal of the SCC, where we noticed an alt Twitter account of hers changed the tag to fit her old Blazin' Hope Z account and changed the actual screen name to some Spanish that was translated by the actual Spanish speakers of our community to something along the lines of trans outcast of a toxic and indifferent community. Something like that. Which, couple things. One, I'm unsure about the framing of trans outcast. Like, are you trying to insinuate that we ostracize trans members of the community? When one of its biggest members is a trans woman? We ignoring the fact that we have a surplus of trans members within the community? I'm not sure about that one. It's a weird way of framing what happened into something more of a transphobic nature than it was. Because, Tippy, you weren't outcasted because you were trans. You were outcasted because you not only lied to everyone constantly about what got you removed from the Cloud Palace, but you kept victimizing yourself or throwing others under the bus at the first sign of any trouble, seeing with Zeppy, Musically Bright, and even Keyblade himself. Not a single person would have batted an eye for you being trans in this community, and you know what? You know that. But of course, that wouldn't fit the other narrative. Because even if we give her the benefit of doubt and just write off the weird insinuation via a language barrier, and she was only referring to her identity as a demigirl in a vacuum, she's still explicitly calling the SCC a toxic and indifferent community, which again is a weird way of wording what happened during that turbulent week. Like, riddle me this, Tippy, what made us indifferent? I'm pretty sure the situation surrounding you was because we were very much not indifferent to the possibility of the Omega getting back in contact with his victims. You know, I'm pretty sure that was the case, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I misunderstood the situation from the beginning. Maybe it was that we were totally indifferent to Vigil and V being friends, and that's why you had to tell us that the two's friendship wasn't a thing anymore in the Cloud Palace, yeah? Or told the absolute degenerate to keep it a secret? Like, by now, we all should know not to trust Tippy at her word, right? But some people are allegedly still doing so, or at the very least are in disbelief of the concept. And that's rather disappointing to hear. She's shown time and time again that she has little regard to what she says and how it affects others. She has shown that she's willing to omit or twist what's being said to get what she wants, which honestly does put a lot into perspective, but frankly, there's not a ton that can really be done about that, and we're not about to unpack it all. Even as I script this, she's trying to change the situation to make her seem less in the wrong. A user by the name of Alex the Hyena reached out to me as I was scripting the next chapter to the story and showed me some direct messages between him and Tippy, where she tried reframing the situation as one where she was lied to, where she merely didn't want shit to escalate, and then attempted to guilt trip Alex back into a friendship between the two of them. I mostly want to focus on her retelling of the situation here, because I think it's truly telling as to how much she both cannot get her story straight and actively did not pay attention to the things that she was being scolded about, or otherwise, at the very least, she didn't care. She admits to having the knowledge of Vigelsio being friends with the Omega, which was a part of it, yeah, but then she goes on to saying that Vigelsio lied to her about a vague multiple things, including hiding his friendship with V, which was what made her think that them being friends was okay to begin with? But, like, that's not what you told us, Tippy. In the first Cloak and Dagger call, you straight up told Lyle that you were trying to get Vigil away from V, remember? I do. I was there for that.
So, I remember Vigil saying the exact same thing as they said to Nekos and Mav. In my case, though, I was trying to get Vigil away from V. Is I did not approve of that, and I was just telling him time and time again to not be friends with V. And
cool. That's all well and good. How long was that between you finding out and you trying to help them? How long did that take?
2 years.
2 years.
I was worried about Vigil because
I'm not. And you shouldn't be either. Go ahead, Heaton. I saw you unmute. Go ahead.
You knew for 2 years?
I was
for 2 years you knew and you sat on this.
I didn't sign on it.
You absolutely sat on it! Telling us would have been not sitting on it, Tippy.
Right.
So what are your qualifications, Tippy?
None?
That's what I thought.
Now you're trying to tell us that you were okay with Vigil and V being friends because no one else seemed to have a problem with it? Tippy, the reason we didn't seem to have a problem with it was because someone went around saying that Vigil stopped being friends with V some time ago. And while I don't have the evidence to prove it, I'm pretty sure it was you. When speaking to Vigelsio about it myself, he was confused about people being unsure of his friendship with V. That's not something that he would just hide for malicious gain. You also didn't get exiled because of this behavior. It was what got you removed from the Cloud Palace because consequences needed to be set, but you weren't exiled for that because you weren't removed from POG when that happened. You did, however, get exiled because you lied to people about what happened. You went into POG after the courthouse call and cried victim, then got everyone worried when you posted suicidal ideation on Twitter about it, only to have been revealed what actually happened in the courthouse call that day to come out a day or two later, which called you out on your lies. And even then, you would have still probably been fine if you didn't try to emotionally manipulate people or try to get me to hide the evidence of what happened. Then she talks about the Keyblade Master stuff, focusing on a point that was never made about how she enabled that behavior. I'm not sure where she got that idea. In fact, the only people that got chewed out about enabling behaviors was me for writing off Keyblades' infantilization of you as a joke as friendly banter between two friends. Your involvement with the Keyblade stuff specifically was as the motivation for Key to do what he did, and that you tried throwing him under the bus, trying to get me to believe that you had no idea of what Key did before the Senate call happened, which was, again, a lie. You absolutely knew what Key did, even mentioning that you did so in this very screenshot. But in a call with you, Musically Bright, and myself, you tried convincing me you had no idea. Also, I noticed that you insinuate Musically tried to kill herself over her involvement, and I'm not sure how I feel about that myself. Like, it comes across as very emotionally manipulative of Tippy here to use Musically's ideation in this way, as it almost weaponizes it against us, trying to paint the SCC as much worse as if we were actively pushing Musically to set action, when at worst, she was just told to butt out when she didn't have any information, trying to defend two people she barely knew. It'd be incredibly hypocritical for us to do that too, since you acknowledge that Key got chucked out on his keister for telling someone else to end their life. So, intentional or no, Tippy is implying some particularly awful insinuations. She also had to specify that she didn't try to silence any minors about the friendship between Vigil and V, but instead only talked to the absolute degenerate about it. But she didn't try to silence him, she just didn't want it to escalate outside the friend group. Yeah, how did you intend to do that? Did you maybe tell Degenerate not to tell people about the friendship between Vigil and V? Or at least say something to that effect? Like, how did you intend to keep this knowledge within your friend group, Anyway, but again, this isn't always applicable to a situation. Maybe it's not the lying or the manipulation that's the issue. Maybe the situation calls for a different approach. Keyblade Master is someone whose actions really only showed malice. In Cloak and Dagger, his crime was telling a fellow commentator to kill herself a week after she tried doing exactly that. Had he not done so, well, we probably wouldn't be talking about him today, but he wasn't exactly known for keeping his mouth shut. The notable part of this was that he was saying this behind the back of the victim, also trying to get away with toxic and aggressive behaviors. Now, what's very interesting to note was that this was not Keyblade's first foray into behaviors like this. All throughout 2023, the dude was being a dick about a situation involving some CinemaSins parody commentators who admittedly were quite vigilant in their coverage of a different CinemaSins parody commentator. I talk a bit about that in the Worst of 2023 video. Keyblade in this situation made a crude potshot at these commentary sin users, particularly to poke at the vague wording of his commentary target in the video.
Though I will give IGN credit for this. Unlike a certain someone I know, they aren't trying to make a living off of harassing someone.
Do you have the slightest idea how little that narrows it down?
Obviously, we get what this was trying to say. It's a direct potshot at people who, in their own right, came off as fairly malicious in nature. And right now, the worst thing I could say is fair game. At least until we learned that, apparently, this potshot gave the group some heat. Apparently. We still haven't seen any evidence of this heat, much less any further proof that Keyblade was actually the cause of any of it, but either way, the group still had every right to not like Key's potshot or find it in poor taste. Absolutely, they have that right. They showed their distaste for the joke, saying that it went too far, and then when asked for an apology, Keyblade gave us this callous and vindictive dismissal, obviously not seeing himself in the wrong when he very much was.
I'm still waiting if you're gonna make an apology video or not.
Well, that depends. What is there to apologize for? As throughout this video, you've kept misinterpreting a singular joke to make it sound worse than it realistically is, and have done nothing to persuade me that what I did was bad and worth apologizing for. Instead, you've given me ample reason to not take you seriously and continue on my day without looking back, since the way you presented yourself is unprofessional, to put it kindly.
Which, on its own, was kind of shitty. Like, Key, you were kind of the catalyst to this year-long drama lasting as long as it did, and while I will agree that Destroyer Shy and friends should have definitely provided evidence of the harassment existing, or better, that it came from you specifically, even without that, these people still felt as if your potshot went too far, and you just turned around and spit in the face of those who felt as if they were owed an apology for a joke that was directly at their own expense. See, Keyblade felt angry, and when Keyblade feels angry, it becomes at the expense of others. The stuff surrounding the Sinning Taters is relatively tame in comparison to Keyblade's other instances of malicious or otherwise vindictive behaviors. If we go back even further than 2023, we had a whole situation involving two Cloud Palace members, Avi Haltman and Donimation. Basically, that situation started when Avi, needing space for his own mental health, told Donnie that he was stepping away from him. Unfortunately, during a very particularly heavy time in Donnie's life. This wound up with Key, who already had issues with Avi in the past, weaponizing Donnie's tendency to develop triggers against Avi by convincing Donnie that Avi had become one himself. This was then pointed at Avi in the form of two text document messages where in the first one, Keyblade outlined every grievance he had with Avi, no matter how big or small. Seriously, feel free to pause this and read it yourself. Some of these gripes are downright fucking petty. This ultimately was Keyblade telling Avi to stay away from him, but mere months later we would see a second iteration of this message, telling Avi to stay out of any voice chat with anyone that Avi had hurt with these ever so problematic behaviors. It was effectively Keyblade trying to push Avi out of the Cloud Palace under the facade that he didn't want Avi to leave or get kicked from the Cloud Palace, so basically hoping that Avi would leave on his own accord after Key's attempts to isolate him from behind the scenes. A notion that I really didn't like even at the time, so I basically sat Avi and Donnie down separately at first to tell them that we were going to get them to talk to each other. You know, communicate. Because yeah, both of them did have communication problems in their own accord. Donnie would flip out at the mere mention of Avi's name, which once got Keyblade yelling at me in DMs about it, and Avi would mute people he didn't like, which, to Key's credit, did sometimes cause problems in voice chats. And before any alarms are raised, both Avi and Donnie agreed to this discussion beforehand. I wasn't just going to drag them into a call unprepared, and even then the call still took months to actually happen. However, when Keyblade heard that I wanted to get Avi and Donnie to sit down and talk, apparently Key didn't like that, so he roped Umbrus into it, attempting to interrogate me out of solving the problem in my own group. What was said in those calls, frankly, isn't of importance right now. I do have them recorded, so maybe in a future video I can let those play out via Lio Convoy, but for the sake of time and brevity, I'll skip out on what was said in those calls in this video, mostly so I can spend more time focusing on Key's malicious behaviors pointed at myself. There was a document Key had Umbrus write called The Plan. And I promise, this is the most batshit insane part of Keyblade's whole ordeal that I almost wish I was making this up. So, going through the details of Key's plan, he wanted to lie to my face about their true intentions of what to do with Avi, make tons of assumptions about my character, put me in a lose-lose scenario where no matter what I answer they wanted me cornered, weaponize abuse that I faced against me to try to paint what Avi did in a much worse light than it was, weaponize both confessions and apologies against me, both videos where I confess and apologize for rampant behaviors that I held up until 2019, and if I didn't answer the way that they wanted to do a whole ass psyop where they intended to tell everyone about how terrible of a person I was for supposedly not respecting this trigger, and then I guess try to corner Avi and I while isolating out specific people who they knew would call them out on their bullshit. Then, if all that still didn't work, they planned on writing a manifesto, sitting in the Cloud Palace inactive to try and freeze all group activity, kick me out of a different group, and then try to get as many active members as they could to partake in this plan, effectively blackmailing me to somehow fix Avi's behavior, which would amount to removing him from the group, because reminder that him being there was the problem to begin with. And this was the revised version. Looking back at the edit history, I saw a version that wanted to go nuclear and try to mass exodus from the Cloud Palace, getting as many members to leave as they possibly could, then spread around that I was this two-faced manipulative individual who didn't respect triggers, despite how frequently I would bend over backwards to try to keep them from happening, simply because I wanted to try to get the bottom of what happened, acknowledging that this might have been a problem for the group to have a member that was still within it be a trigger for someone who is also still within the group. You'd probably do the same thing too. And considering that Donnie also agreed to have this conversation while under the delusion that Avi was a trigger for him, I don't think I was doing anything necessarily wrong. I took the precautions needed to make sure that he was okay with it, and he was. So Key saying that I wasn't respecting people's triggers is just flat out not only disrespectful, but just a blatant lie to anyone who conversed otherwise. And for why? Because he didn't like Avi, obviously. Avi and Key always butted heads given the opportunity. So this malicious plan of his to take Avi out of a space that he was in wasn't too much of a stretch to believe. You might be wondering, hearing this, why I kept Key around when he was doing all this obviously shady and downright horrid shit behind the scenes, and, well, that was simply because I didn't know of the plan or his predation on Donnie's traumatic experiences until after Cloak and Dagger happened, and I gotta tell you, learning that shit floored me, and further put into perspective the kind of underlying issues that Key had as a person. If you were on his shit list, that was kind of it. Everything that he did towards you would be out of spite or a malicious self-gratification session. So, perhaps this also isn't a readily applicable communication issue to mention towards the rest of the community. After all, malice, cowardice, and lying, all while are things that happen and do lead to communication issues, they're not the normal kind of issues that arise from a fucked communicative approach, and that's where the rest of these stories come in. Because I feel like only looking at the extreme examples won't get my point across as well than if I were to use the lesser and more common problems that we see arise from time to time. So, I guess from here we can start talking about Angel Sentoki, previously Nightmare Kakamine, or as I'll just refer to her for the sake of ease and the fact that everyone already kind of knew her for such in the community, Morgan, was an ex-SCC member who got ran out of the community while I was getting ran to the emergency room to get my gallbladder removed. Fun times all around. I just loved getting the DM that Morgan was leaving the Cloud Palace in my hospital bed. Anyway, she'll be our example of how neutrality can be a problem. So, back in the day there was this guy in this community called RCV5. He and another user by the name of Tooth Lily, who I will just call Habit for the sake of ease, had dated back in 2016. Then, in November of 2023, Habit released a doc detailing their relationship, accusing RCV of grooming them. Now, Habit was like 14 through 17 during this relationship, and we were initially led to believe that RCV was much older, but when cross-referencing, found out that he would have been roughly 17 through 20. Now, that's not to say that Habit wasn't groomed. There certainly could have been a power dynamic there, for sure. We've seen it before with V Omega and Joni Rue, who had a much smaller age gap, so I don't at all doubt this fact. Though I will say, and it sucks that I feel the need to say this, that Habit's initial screenshots aren't the best pieces of evidence to confirm this. And even they themselves make note of that fact early on in the document. But kinda like with any grooming allegation, I do at least want to give some benefit of doubt in favor of the victim, and at least to my knowledge, RCV hasn't revealed any information that would otherwise counteract the allegations against them, so I am more willing to believe Habit in this regard, at least until further notice. Now, what I just did there was playing an actually neutral party. You'd look at the evidence given when the victim wishes to tell their story. You'd hear the victim first and parse through the information that they give. It's basic courtesy, and it's not disrespectful to the person who felt victimized in their situation. However, Morgan didn't do that. Morgan instead immediately turned to the alleged groomer to hear their side of the story first, because that's certainly a play that normal people do when they want information about someone's past actions. Already, we have a particularly egregious situation on our hands, similarly to my initial knee-jerk response to the George Raccoon allegations in 2019. We did later confirm that Morgan didn't actually read any of Habit's document or screenshots at the beginning of December, so I don't think I'm merely saying this on the basis of not liking Morgan's actions or to make a point about how poorly Morgan handled the situation. We'll come back to that later though. For now, I want to focus on the actions that Morgan took within the document. We see within the DMs of Morgan and RCV that Morgan specifically went to RCV because she was tired of his silence on the matter. RCV then, in turn, explained that his silence was because his mother convinced him that nobody would listen to contrary evidence. Which, no, if you have it, you probably should be trying to clear your name, but whatever, again, we'll come back to that. Morgan then went into the Nexus to talk about it, 11 days later. Now, Morgan had deleted the initial comment before I could see it, to which was days after the situation happened because, reminder, that I spent the night in the ER, so that's amazing. But thanks to Stardust Zombie, I was able to get the original comment where Morgan mentioned that she had a talk with RCV to talk to him about what he did to Habit, but that she was afraid to post that side of the story on Twitter. When pressed by Stardust, Morgan had stated that she was neutral on the situation, and that she was afraid of posting it on Twitter due to the fear of being dogpiled for it. To which Blaze the Movie Fan mentioned that it seemed silly to only post about it in a server, with almost all of the SCC members in it to begin with. And don't worry, we'll come back to Blaze later. He's going to be important. The back and forth with Morgan continued, with people basically wondering what the fuck Morgan was on, and she's responding in turn with the most drain-bed responses she could give, until Habit took notice of the chat and chose violence. We'll get to the rest of that later, but I want to focus on another important factor here in regards to Morgan's messages in the chat, because as I mentioned earlier, she didn't actually see all of the evidence that Habit gave. Now, I want to clear something up here and say that my initial insinuation being that Morgan didn't read anything might have been a bit misconstruing, because Morgan did read the screenshots in the doc, or so she says, but by her own admission within the Nexus chat, she didn't watch the following video that Habit had posted to update everyone with a more in-depth look at the DMs. And this is where I want to come back around to my initial neutral stance example, because if you were paying attention, more keenly listening viewers might have heard me state that the initial screenshots were not great evidence. And they aren't. But that's not the only bit of evidence that Habit gave, and it certainly wasn't the only piece of evidence that we had at the time of Morgan's messages in the Nexus. Habit had updated the doc after posting it, or at least I presume they did, as it's labeled as an update in the doc, so that kind of implies that it wasn't there prior. And if Morgan had made these messages before that video was linked, I might have been able to let Morgan's neutrality off with a bit of a side-eye and move on. But Morgan talked about her neutrality 11 days after the update was made and acknowledged the video's existence within the chat, thus clarifying that she did not indeed have enough of an educated opinion on the matter to claim her neutrality in good faith. Because when you actually acknowledge the contents of the DMs that Habit shows within the video, a much clearer image is painted as to where the notion of grooming came from. We watch as these two do some sort of pet play between the two of them, and that's where the weaker screenshots come from, because we do not see any sort of boundary crossing or controlling attitude from RCV, and at most it's just cringy roleplay, which grooming does not inherently make. That is until August 1st, 2019, where the attitude between Habit and RCV was shifted pretty drastically. Going by the context clues, this seems to be after a breakup of some sort. The DMs kind of get fairly sparse, I notice, after May of 2018, but it's not really any of my business of what happened there, so I ain't gonna speculate. Regardless, RCV being worried about their friendship is where things get interesting. The language used towards Habit starts to get fairly controlling. At least I think that's the right word here. Like, this part where RCV demands an answer out of Habit as to how drawing made them feel is merely the beginning, because every so often past this point, the two wind up having a conversation that winds up continuing with the demanding attitude. August 7th, 2019, RCV tells Habit how bad of a partner they were in the relationship, and informing Habit of this lack of care they apparently had, because you need to put effort into it, because working together is what makes a relationship work. Putting more of an onus onto Habit, trying to make them feel bad about the relationship not working out. And, I don't know, given the DMs we saw prior to this, I also feel like there might have been a hint of gaslighting in it. Grant you, I shouldn't be speculating too much, as again, I did not know the extent of their relationship. I'm just saying I wouldn't be too shocked. August 11th, 2019, after demanding a response from Habit about their previous conversation, RCV gives that emotionally manipulative, "Well, you could trust me, though," after Habit mentions some paranoia. Not sure that's what someone who's scared of everyone would want to hear, especially when they're not looking for any validation. It's just kind of a little out of the blue. All I'm saying, especially after being so confrontational about Habit not really communicating with you prior. August 13th, that confrontational behavior continues, and RCV really puts on the emotional manipulation. Same goes for the 14th. By the 15th, RCV claims that he'll give Habit some space by not DMing them for about a week, and that lasted 4 days because RCV claimed it was unhealthy for them. And lastly, September 2nd, we see RCV be jealous of Habit's significant other, saying that no matter what I do, the significant other will always do it better. Even if you don't want to call this grooming, RCV is still noticeably manipulative. So going to him for his side of the story isn't going to give you more than an "it wasn't me." Regardless of what he claims his intentions were, something he obviously defaulted to in the DMs between he and Morgan, even if we give him the benefit of doubt and assume that he was telling us the truth of his intentions, the actions don't give us much reason to assume otherwise, and it still doesn't change Habit's feelings on the matter, something he obviously was trying to do throughout these DMs. RCV is able to read a room. He noticed the discomfort between me and Habit. It was something he got onto their case about at several points, and whatever happened between the two of them when they were dating, or whatever happened that caused the breakup, it was clear that Habit just didn't quite feel the same way about their friendship as he did, and instead of backing off, he pushed himself onto them much harder. So this was what Morgan was missing in the full story. This was what she dismissed before going to RCV directly with the intention of possibly debunking the allegations against someone she considers a friend. This is what she thought she was being neutral about, which is another thing that I want to talk about before heading back to the Nexus screenshots. It's not really much to say that you're neutral and not act upon it. Morgan saw the DMs in the document and then turned to RCV hoping that he would disprove the allegations, which inherently implies that she thinks less of Habit's evidence. That's not neutral, that's showing a clear bias in favor of the accused party. And look, I get why she would have this stance. Sometimes a bit of contrarianism or skepticism is healthy. And were Habit just making up allegations against someone who made them severely uncomfortable, taking that opposing viewpoint and building upon it could help put the situation in a much more nuanced light. But to pretend that you're an impartial party because you take that opposing viewpoint isn't honest, and it shows bad faith at worst. Specifically because Morgan didn't look at all the evidence. So, back to the Nexus. Obviously, because of what we were told by Morgan, people were obviously going to chew her out about her attempts to downplay Habit's feelings. And Habit was beyond not having it, in part because it's their trauma, obviously, but also because this was not the first time we saw someone speak out against them. Just days before this conversation happened, there was a guy called Obaz who dropped the whole document trying to disprove the allegations against RCV. And like, I have problems with that document too. For instance, the guy tries to get on the Habit's case for bending the definition of the word grooming, but he literally redefines the word to only be applicable towards adults. He even clarifies which definition he's using, being the one that you get when you search the definition on Google, but the very definition he uses doesn't make that distinction, so he's just flat out lying to us. And it doesn't take much to disprove that. One might try to argue that Obaz was only using the Google definition to emphasize the common use and that I shouldn't get so caught up in detail when he's arguing from a more general perspective, but even to that I can still argue that most other places don't make that distinction either. Now, as I discuss this particular talking point, I am allowing other websites' definitions of what grooming is to pop up on screen, and you're free to pause and read them as you may. Some of these definitions do correlate with what Obaz says. I didn't go out of my way to cherry pick anything, but you'll find that overall they're few and far between. Some sites didn't even have relevant definitions at all, and depending on if you were looking at an English dictionary, a legal definition, or a psychology article, you'll find that different distinctions were specified within the definitions. But commonly, I found that websites that define grooming in the way that we're talking about it purposefully do not make it a point to say that only adults can be groomers, and I think that might come into the fact that we have a much better understanding of the behavior now than we ever did prior. The notion that only adults can be groomers is one that I definitely understand, given that we do commonly see groomers that are adults. Plus, grooming is commonly agreed upon requiring the victim to be younger than the person doing the grooming, so it makes perfect sense as to where someone would jump to the conclusion the abuser is of adult age. However, what making a statement so matter-of-factly does is conflate grooming with pedophilia, which is not what that is, at least not inherently. Like, yeah, it's maybe exceptionally common for the relationship between an adult groomer and their child victim to get sexual. I guess I can maybe concede there, although I don't know the statistics myself. What I do know is that grooming both doesn't have to be that way and can make any age the target, and implying otherwise makes grooming a very circumstantial crime that can only happen under very specific circumstances. So grooming for money couldn't be called out. Grooming a younger adult, an impossibility. The utilization of power dynamics to get someone comfortable with sexualization enough to get in bed with them? No. That's just an abuse of power dynamics. That's a totally different thing. You heard it first here, folks. People like Onision are totally innocent in that regard. Is the sarcasm getting across well enough? This misconstruction of what grooming is does feel particularly common in people who come to the defense of alleged groomers, but all it does is continue to poison the well on what we should even constitute as such an action. And I get the reverse of this problem, right? I get the argument that some people are too quick to call the actions of someone who is just creepy or manipulative as grooming. I've covered a couple instances of this in the past, and it's not like this particular instance you couldn't maybe critique Habit's use of it, but just doing so by redefining a word that you're already trying to get onto the victim's case for redefining is a particularly gross and manipulative tactic on its own, and it's double standards. I think I've shown enough examples. Let's get back to the document. Another problem that I have with Obaz's document is how he begins to question Habit's intentions of releasing these claims, explicitly stating that he believes these claims were made maliciously, or at the very least made while dangerously ignorant and misinformed, which wraps back around to the focus of RCV and Habit's age gap, which isn't the problem, as Amity said, for the reasons I just explained a little bit ago. Like, he is right to say that bending definitions like this can hurt actual victims, that much I do agree with. But again, not only is Obaz a hypocrite for stating that, given his own attempts to do so, but outside of being wrong about the age gap, something that had been trying to be rectified within the document, Obaz does literally nothing else to try and debunk the actual actions taken by RCV that might or might not have been considered grooming. And the only evidence we actually have about the age gap discrepancy being an issue is Digital Tie, who made a tweet about it with the wrong ages. Something that, yes, should be rectified if it hadn't before. The other instances of Obaz calling on people using incorrect information does not have any names or handles beside them, nor are they really using that information in the same way that Ty did. So at best, this is just wrong and nothing evidence cherry-picked to make a vague point, and at worst, these could be much more malicious on Obaz's part, purposefully taking these out of context. Plus, he goes on this big diatribe about Amity, Habit's spouse, ghosting him to focus on her own life problems. Like, I get that these are serious allegations, I do, but like, come on, guy. Them having other things come up doesn't mean that these allegations were made just to destroy RCV. Get better evidence of intent, please. Anyway. So, now that I've outlined that mess, it should come as no surprise that when Morgan also wanted to absolve RCV of his manipulative behaviors, that Habit was going to be infuriated. And infuriated they were, rightfully so. The conversation quickly devolved into a shouting match after Morgan used the disapproval of the chat to enforce her fear of publishing RCV's side of the story. But frankly, I feel like doing things this way just made it worse for her. At least if she published it to Twitter, she could have given herself the benefit of Twitter possibly burying the tweet. But this basically forced the contrarianism into a much more confined space and had everyone's attention who was online to see it at the time. Especially the very person she's casting doubt upon. Remember that Morgan definitely didn't go to Habit with these doubts directly, so it's not like Morgan wanted the victim of the behaviors to hear her thoughts. She wasn't ready to tell off the victim what she truly thought of the evidence against their abuser, which, like, no, you don't have to do. Obviously, I'm not saying to go around and interrogate every victim willy-nilly, but obviously Morgan wants us to be on her side. That's why she was afraid of posting onto Twitter. Plus, I think it's to be said how much Morgan was making Habit's abuse all about Morgan. It's Morgan that's afraid to talk about the abuse. It's Morgan who is worried we'll dogpile her. It's Morgan whose opinion should matter the most, as an impartial third party, or so she says. Very similar to Obaz's document, actually, who wound up sharing very similar sentiments about how important his words were compared to the victims. As someone who has also spoken out against allegations in the past, allow me to say that there is a point to saying believe the victims, because they'll know how they feel and react to a situation. They know more about the abuse they face than us as outsiders, and while no, not every allegation is believable at face value, and we shouldn't always believe the victims blindly, when the point of your involvement is to make this situation about you and your feelings, and you were not directly a part of it, stop it. Do not go further, because you do not have an actual part in this situation, further exacerbated by the fact that Morgan is trying to denounce the information and evidence that actually exists without any further evidence to debunk the claims made against RCV. I also want to touch on the rest of the Nexus's attitude and actions in this situation. We'll come back to it much later, but while I get the anger, some of y'all are trying too hard. Again, we'll come back to that later though. Another thing I want to mention about the conversation that's not a criticism of the SCC itself, but gets back to the conversation at hand. Apparently, RCV's mother enabled the relationship. So, what does that matter, Susie? Well, it doesn't. But given that was the person who also told RCV she'd be fine with him making a statement to defend himself, I thought that was interesting. Make of that what you will. Anyway, going back into the Nexus logs, and I really only have one more thing to really bring up in turn with Morgan's attitude throughout this. Given how, when pressed on her improper handling of allegations, she brought up her severe anxiety, talking about how she felt she could never say this out loud to begin with, and then basically dipped from the chat for the rest of the conversation, only coming back later to tell us that she's since cut ties with RCV and that she'd be taking a break from everything. And that about wraps up Morgan's story in the Nexus, and it's kind of a roundabout way of saying this, but like, yeah, I don't know what you were expecting either, Morgan. You don't just shrug off evidence that you didn't look at because you didn't want to look at it. Your faux neutral stance be damned. In fact, it's kind of insulting to even call it neutrality to begin with, since you showed throughout this conversation that you didn't even believe Habit's story, nor cared to, since your aforementioned confession that you only looked at the rest of Habit's evidence later on. A Twitter announcement she made the day of doesn't make things even the least bit better, since she continues to make everything about herself instead of focusing on the person who she really hurt the most, Habit. In fact, Habit's name doesn't even get brought up once in the entire apology. I mean, there's barely even an apology there to begin with, since most of it is throwing herself a pity party and making excuses for the bad behavior, wanting to get back to being a fun-loving, friendly type of girl. There's literally more about her want to watch Higurashi Chapter 3 than there is an actual apology in this thread. There is no break, Morgan. Nobody is gonna want you back after this. There's probably more info that I could disclose about this situation, but I don't really have the evidence to show it. Apparently, she still kept in contact with, like, Tippy and Key. She apparently still kept in contact with an old ex-commentator by the name of Gwiss. But I don't have any of that evidence, and I don't really know if even that's even super important. So, as far as I'm concerned, we can move on from the situation that happened while I was in the emergency room. Instead, we can talk about the situation that happened after my computer crapped out for 2 weeks. Enter stage left. And this is going to be the long haul. Blaze the Movie Fan has been a pretty recurring target on this channel, so he probably needs no introduction from our returning viewers. But, perhaps if you're new here and just rubbernecking niche internet drama, you probably know of the guy from his memes.
Time to take a piss. Alex the Lion, what the hell are you doing in my car? What's a Burger King to a burger front? Goodbye, Squirtle.
He was kind of the closest thing the SCC had to a celebrity, frequently mentioned on other channels like OV Plays. However, up until December 9th, 2023, he was a part of this niche little slideshow commentary community. However, a comment he left in the Nexus got a bunch of people up in arms and ready to fight, saying that I failed in my goal of making a decent SCC-centric server because of the couple dramas that aren't super important right now, and the Morgan stuff that I just mentioned prior. This is in reference to the fact that prior to me making a server for SCC people to meet up, Blaze had one that was way more public and way more problematic. In fact, we within the community called that place the Waffle House due to all the garbage that happened in there. But it wasn't because of any fighting that happened there that the server wound up being such a problem. It was the lack of moderation and care when situations did arise that wound up getting people to distance themselves away from it after a short while. Something I guess you could technically argue in my case, given as of scripting, I am the only current moderator of the server. More on that later. and I was kinda out of commission. But I feel like it'd be unfair of Blaze, seeing by that point I was maybe recovered from surgery for like maybe a full week before my computer crapped out on me during this situation. And that's a very strong maybe. It might have been shorter time than that. And Blaze should know that fact, seeing as he talked to me about the Morgan thing the day after I got out of the hospital, and I had told him that I was still in the recovering stage post-operation. I think I stopped feeling the pain towards the start of December, but even then, my body was still adjusting to having no gallbladder, and good God, the last thing on my mind was getting back involved with drama. In fact, the other two situations Blaze alludes to involving two users called Indy and Destroyer Shy also happened while I was in the ER and dealing with computer problems respectively. I am not happy. I literally could not moderate during this time frame, and people acknowledged this fact going into the discussion with Blaze. Habit also bringing up that Blaze is effectively weaponizing Habit's abuse against the server probably also didn't help matters for our Icelandic friend here. Blaze, however, wasn't worried about the actions that these people caused that got them into hot water. Blaze was much more concerned with the comfort levels of the server and how other people would feel being in there with conflict merely existing in the space. Some of these conflicts, by the way, aren't fucking community ending. Like the stuff with Indy, as an example, it was a simple conflict of apathy. Indy was tired of hearing about the Palestinian genocide on TikTok and vocalized that fatigue in the Nexus, dismissing it merely as a quote, whatever it is. A notion that I find pretty gross, since people's lives are at risk. One of those lives being one of the members within the community and someone who I consider a friend. But regardless, a discussion was had. Indy admittedly didn't seem to internalize much of it, but outside of some bad taste in the mouth about the guy since then, the situation de-escalated for the most part without me getting involved. And the Destroyer Shy stuff, as was mentioned in the discussion, didn't even happen within the Nexus to begin with. From my understanding as of scripting, that is an ongoing feud, and I'm probably going to get involved to get people to discuss things after this video is done and dusted. But it's not fair on Blaze to blame something from a different server as happening within the Nexus, as if that's somehow a mark on the server I made for everyone. Anyway, to get into the actual discussion itself, Blaze seems to be under the presumption that I wanted to keep the server as, quote, drama-free as possible. And to a degree, he's right. Like, I'd rather keep the peace than have everyone be at each other's throats all the time. But in no way was I expecting there to not be ever disagreement or altercations between commentators. Literally, the first two rules of the server implied that I was just looking for a bit of civility, and I didn't expect everyone to get along 100% of the time, which seems to be what Blaze was expecting out of the Nexus. The actual conversation amped up pretty quickly. Blaze was quick to delete his comment and then persist to try to shut out any further discussion on the matter, despite the fact that he was the one who started it to begin with. It'd be easy to just say that Blaze wanted to avoid accountability for a shitty take and downplaying of situations that happened, including some most traumatic experience with a manipulative ex-boyfriend at best, and I'd be lying if I pretended like I too didn't feel somewhat in agreement. But it also seems very out of character for Blaze, since he was usually pretty receptive to commentaries done on him, even if he kinda had a problem with actually applying the criticism to his own work. Wonder why the situation was any different. I genuinely don't have an answer. Even after knowing all of the details to the situation, I couldn't tell you. There's a bunch of theories we were given and a bunch of different conflicting reasons, and it's just one of those things I don't think will ever be explained fully. However, the consistent through line seems to be Blaze's want for admiration and respect from his peers. Why he thought this was the route that would get that respect, God only knows, but I think he found out pretty quickly that that was not going to work in this scenario. Eventually, he starts coming around in the messages, but by then the damage had been done and no one was really happy with his statements and actions. And eventually, people started pulling up other things that Blaze has done. Sometime after Blaze had stepped away to pull up his Christmas tree of all things. In particular, Umbrus brought up a situation that happened in the previous SCC server where, when being confronted about a user known as Limbo Fuzzframe, who flirted with a minor in their 20s and parasocially threatened to fly me out to his state, Blaze dismissed it and focused on how much of a no-name they were in the community because that's what's important, truly. Fractured Light also, prior to that, alluded to a time that Blaze had to remove an alleged pedophile out of his chat, being talked into the removal after the mods he assigned were totally okay with them in there because the alleged pedophilic actions were on Twitter and not in Discord. I don't know who the mods were in this scenario, but if this is true, y'all are fucking idiots too who should be downright ashamed in your negligence. Be glad none of us thought to ask for names, because y'all absolutely would have been put on blast here. Eventually, Blaze came back to the chat after putting up his Christmas tree and once again admitted fault, but explicitly refused to say sorry as he didn't feel like it would really mean anything, which, It might have if you had said it sooner without pitching a fit about it. I'm just saying. There's a number of things you could bring up about Blaze's response to the backlash he got for this careless dismissal of situations. In his return message especially, because he brings everything around back to him. He claims he shouldn't assume people are going to have a problem with anything he says. Follow that up with him talking about putting his projects on hold, says that he shouldn't pin all of the responsibility of fights happening on the server on me, turns around to talk about how much he wants a good reputation in the community, continues that line of thought before he hard turns again to talk about how he once tried too hard against M-Skull back in the day, as if that matters. You'll find that Blaze does this a lot, and I do feel like that might be a product of him being on the spectrum, as like with most SCC members, he's somewhere there, so it can be forgiven that he does this, despite not really fixing the main issue at hand of him not really internalizing a damn thing he was being told during this discussion. And I know saying this is probably going to get people in the comments like, oh, but I'm on the spectrum and I don't have this problem, so Blaze doesn't have that excuse. Like is usual for any time someone being autistic is brought up, as if the whole point of neurodivergence being a spectrum to begin with doesn't allow for people to experience it differently, but whatever. I just know I'm not gonna hold Blaze to the fire for his weird trails of thought. I don't see much point in it, and it's not like I'm much better in that regard anyway. Beyond this point, there's not too much to talk about, at least from the Nexus itself and on the topic of Blaze. However, my god, there is certainly more to discuss about Blaze as a whole. Because some people dragged Blaze into a voice call where they were allowed to scold him more to his face. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire call because they really do loop around the same few talking points, just taking turns grilling him for his continued inaction and dismissal, and if I were to go through all of it, we would be frankly here all day. Though I do have plenty more criticisms of this call, and even in the clips that I will go over in this chapter, you will probably catch on to a few of them yourself. I want to just go over the important bits to highlight specifically some of the issues with Mr. Movie Fan here. My criticisms of the rest of the call will be saved for a later chapter, so expect us to come back to it. So Umbrus took charge of this call and starts by asking Blaze a pretty easy question to answer.
So Blaze.
Yeah.
What is it that you said in the general chat that started all of this?
Well, I was concerned about the server, and yeah, I was concerned about the server, and that's why I made the message in the first place.
And what specifically did you mention in that message?
Well, that I'm afraid that this server wasn't a good place for commentary members because there was drama nearly every week.
Right. Good jumping off point.
I get why Umbrus chose this route. It was to segue into the point of discussion and to see if Blaze understood why he was in the call to begin with. However, y'all spent 2 hours grilling the man about it. I think by this point, even the most head-ass of people would be able to sit there and say why you guys wanted them into a call. Anyway, continuing, a lot of this does persist to dance around the point though, and we'll have to come back to that later as it's more important for the point that I really want to make in that different chapter, so we'll pull a pin in that. Umbrus then hands the mic off to Habit, who really gets into the grilling.
Habit, you take the floor.
No, yeah, I kind of want to talk about this because this has been happening. Like, this is like the second time this has happened in this server, but it's not the first time it's happened. Like, this is the third time it's happened with this situation alone, but it's not the first. This has happened so many other times throughout my life, and I'm kind of just sick of it. I am sick of people trying to downplay shit that has happened to me, shit that has left me fucking debilitated at times, trauma-wise. Like, there have been days where I genuinely just can't fucking function normally because I have to think about what has been done to me for years and years. And yet people want to come in and be in a server or a space that I am in and not even try to give me even the decency of treating me like I'm a human being. Just basically treating me as just like fucking collateral damage, I guess. And I'm sick of it. Because, frankly, I don't like not being treated as a human being. I don't like that so many people want to dehumanize me in one way or another. I am sick and tired of people trying to make my trauma all about them. in one way or another. Whether and especially I hate it when when I call this shit out and just instead of being like, oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that again, they fucking self-immolate and make it all about, woe is me, I'm sorry, whoa, it's not about you.
Now, this is a fair point to bring up, right? Because even if you misunderstand a situation, that's salvageable. That could be a simple mistake that, while definitely wouldn't look good on you, wouldn't be the end of your reputation you care so much about. Take Morgan's story as an example. Her choice to go to RCV is still a fucking stupid thing to do, because really, what would you gain out of asking a confirmed manipulator what they did? However, that situation wouldn't have been as harsh on Morgan if she didn't turn around and make everything about her, taking away the impact that RCV might have had on his victim. Blaze did something very similar throughout the conversation in the Nexus, if you didn't notice, focusing on his reputation in the community, focusing on his perception of the Nexus, then focusing on his actions to effectively flog himself in front of everyone instead of just apologizing to the person who needed to hear it the most. Apologize to the person you impacted and make sure they're okay first and foremost. And that is not what Blaze did.
It's not even that, because I feel like it's been a shorter time, because I haven't been fully open about this, because I don't know if it would be important or not. I don't know if this has been shared around about, but I had Morgan in my DMs trying to do the same shit again, of apologizing to me, but sandwiching in between of woe is me's. And being oh man, I'm getting therapy, I'm doing all this and that, and I'm and being rude to me in the middle of it and trying to imply that, oh yeah, no, don't worry guys. I am sick and tired of people acting like that my situation is just some sort of drama or allegations or whatever. Cause I lived through that shit.
If I may argue one thing here from habit, they are allegations. An allegation is just a claim or assertion that someone has done something illegal or wrong, and claiming that RCV is a groomer is by that point a claim or an assertion of wrongdoing. But I get the more overall point, and I do agree. Treating these kinds of situations with a carelessness on the level of petty internet drama is how we get situations like Morgan and Blaze, because then it's just framed as not as important or not as impactful.
I was going to say, Habit, take the floor immediately after he answers this question, but I want to hear it from his mouth. Do you mind explaining how the Morgan thing is drama to me, Blaze?
I would like to ask my questions.
Wait, let Blaze answer.
Well, the thing is, I considered it drama because there was a lot of heat going on in the chat. I know that doesn't excuse it, but that's the reason why I thought it was drama.
That's a really bad reason. Just because it's negative or hostile doesn't make it merely drama, especially not inherently. In fact, the negative emotions might be more of a reason to take a situation more seriously. Not to invoke Godwin's Law during such a discussion, especially since it's kind of an extreme example, but I do feel like it makes the general point I'm trying to make well enough. But there was probably a lot of negative emotions and hostility during World War II, Blaze. Would you consider that on the same level as Destroyer Shy ignoring someone's explicitly stated boundaries? Actually, would you consider what happened with V Omega a simple drama? Something to consider. Umbrus winds up making a very similar point to that a little later, but instead involving one Ray Kohai, a person who... Well, that's actually a long story, but let's just say she's not a good person, and Blaze responds with the following.
I don't remember the situation.
Huh.
Okay.
Which, really weird responses from others in the call, not gonna lie. Figured you guys would be able to call this out better than you did, since Blaze literally made a video talking about the Ray thing.
There is a document on Ray that you should definitely read. It's a very important one. It reveals that she is an abuser. She has abused a lot of people, and she even did that during her heyday as... I'm not gonna say the name again, I only brought it up once for context. Yeah. She even abused a lot of people behind the scenes during her heyday in the slideshow commentary community. But yeah, there is a document that reveals all the shady shit she has done behind the scenes. And I highly recommend you check that fucking document out. It reveals a lot of stuff.
I don't believe for a second Blaze wouldn't remember, especially not with something as wretched as the shit Ray did. In fact, it was just a week prior that I had a conversation with Blaze myself where he brought up what Ray did. So, like, I know no one would have known this conversation. I didn't just go spreading it around, so no one could actually, like, call him out on this blatant lie and using this as evidence, but you guys absolutely could have called him out on the conversation that happened within the Nexus about it. Now, I suppose the counter-argument could have been that Blaze was saying he didn't remember whether or not he considered the Ray callouts themselves drama, but that wouldn't make any sense given the context of how much he knew about the Ray callouts conceptually. Within the chat, Blaze had talked about her behavior of behind-the-scenes malice, so he knew Ray was an immensely toxic individual who abused people. So even if he couldn't remember if he considered the callouts drama initially, he could have still answered with whether or not he would consider them drama now. That said, he treated the allegations as seriously as everyone else did coming out with their stories within his video, so we know how Blaze treated the document on release. Now, obviously, I'm not saying hold his face to the grill and savagely rip and tear into him over this, and sometimes catching a lie can be a little difficult at times. But, you know, maybe allowing him a pass off with this lie in particular maybe is not as productive as maybe we would have liked it to be, as this kind of lets him brush off the question given. Now, for Blaze's sake, I know it can sometimes be difficult for that line to be seen. The line between drama and trauma can be as quickly blurred as it can be established. But that's when you start listening to the victims to gauge how they're reacting to the situation at hand. These things require nuance and being able to read a room. And if you can't do that without good reason, then you probably should have backed off before making any sort of statement.
So, okay, hold on. So, the reason
I don't
that
know how to answer this.
you don't... I was gonna say, I would just to put it into perspective. The reason that you not only called, I'm gonna put it bluntly, someone defending, not even someone, Angel or Morgan or whatever the fuck their username was, I don't care at this point. They defended Habits Groomer. You called that drama because you were worried about the state the server was in. You put the onus on Susie's failure of management, even though this was literally out of her control and she was going through things in real life that stopped her from really interacting with the server. It was because you were worried about the server. Okay, I do not understand how that at all leads to just calling it drama and also blaming Susie for things that are completely out of her control. How do we get from A to B here, Blaze?
Yeah.
Walk me through your thought process.
Well, I was thinking that's the thing. I was thinking too much about how worried I was about the server.
Again, like
you weren't thinking.
No. Let me take this. So you weren't thinking. I am sick of hearing. I've heard this before. I think a lot of us have heard the "I wasn't thinking."
I heard it literally earlier today.
Yeah, Livy had to hear it earlier today. And here's the thing: you gotta start thinking when it comes to situations like what I had to deal with. You can't just turn your brain off because you're worried about a fucking Discord server. When the more serious pressing matters of things like predators are involved. Like, I'm sorry. I know, like, I love this server. This server's awesome. This server could shut down tomorrow, and I think it would be more important to handle Morgan's bullshit behavior than this server.
Another fair point by Habit. Really, I don't have much to add here. I just really felt like highlighting this moment as something more people need to kind of realize. Don't put victims' well-being after Discord server status. Simple as that. This also applies to really anything of a similar ilk, including community status, but we'll come back to that.
Do you care about people's feelings too much to the point where, like, the moment they turn out to be scumbags, you're like, oh, welp?
Yeah.
I don't like what that implies. And forgive me for being skeptical and admittedly a bit conspiratorial, but are you hiding any associations that we should know about?
I'd like to ask a question after Blaze answers this.
TikTok.
Here, let me simplify it. Are you
What
friends with
exactly do you mean?
are you friends with anyone who got called out within the past like year or so in this community?
Yeah.
What?
What?
Who?
What? Who?
Names now.
Well, I did contact with CK Smith, but I'm probably gonna remove him soon.
Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me?
No, can I take this one? Can I take this one? Because
yes.
I Blaze, did River not tell you everything about CK Smith?
Yeah.
He was retweeting child porn on his main Twitter.
I don't know. No, I don't know anything about the CK Smith. I was not around during this guy, but I will say, as someone who had to deal with disgusting motherfuckers like him, the fact that you, after how many people told you and warned you, hey, kick him from your server, and told you off, and you're still friends with him. I'm gobsmacked. I'm fucking gobsmacked.
This was another notable point against Blaze that I do feel the need to mention. Blaze just admitted that, as of this call, he was still friends with a user known as CK Smith, someone who, allegedly, retweeted child pornography on their main Twitter account. You know, not that it would be really okay if it was on an alt, but bear with me now. Blaze was told about this behavior, and instead of removing CK from his Discord server, left CK in there to, I guess, keep his feelings in mind. This extended to the likes of the aforementioned Limbo Phosframe, Halo fan, who not only showed his jewels to minors, but also once linked real child pornography in the comments of one of my videos, and Carmen Ryder, who defends Lolicon and is willing to just be inappropriate around children regardless. The lattermost is especially noteworthy because if I recall correctly, while it wasn't brought up in the call, Carmen was added into Blaze's server specifically in retort to people in there talking about one of her videos. He didn't like that they were talking shit, so he added her in there. Because that's smart. That's what you should do in that scenario. Clearly. Like, I understand the hesitance to distance yourself from those you consider your pals, but it's important that when you have a situation like this, where people you're pals with are just a genuine detriment to those around you, i.e. a danger to kids, that you, I don't know, focus on keeping those minors safe and removing the problematic individuals from the premises at least. You probably shouldn't stay friends with them at all, but if you really feel the need to keep awful people like that around, I don't know, maybe they owe you $350 or something, at least do it in a place where minors aren't in danger. Fucking Christ. Blaze, you should have seen how we've treated those that are awful individuals despite how friendly we were with them prior. At the very beginning of this video, I spoke about 3 of those very same instances. Keyblade, Tippy, and Vigil were all people I had once considered friends too. But it was important to remove them when the curtains were drawn and their toxic behaviors were revealed to us. Same went with Ray. Same went with V initially. Like, you've been around these instances and have seen even the most respected members of the community get ostracized because they were irredeemable and toxic. Why were you so willing to let actual predators roam so freely where people would have been in danger? It's downright irresponsible at best and straight up hazardous at worst. And the danger of it all aside, God knows how it seems on the outside looking in that you're so willing to associate with those same people. We've already had people accuse us of knowingly harboring groomers in the past. You don't help that accusation when you were actively doing so.
I want to give as many people as I can the benefit of doubt.
That is... Sorry.
That kind of ties into my question. Was I the only person you were never reluctant to ban from TSSCC? Because you banned me the night I was kicked from POG. Everyone else you seem to be dragging your feet on except me. What the fuck?
You know what? Again, this is another solid point. So for context, Ephraim was cut from POG after a situation occurred where Ephraim himself was a bit inappropriate with minors. Specifically, he'd find himself flirting with user Fractured Light. And I need to specify that because some people seem to get the wrong idea about this situation. Carmen, the victim himself, while did allege sexual harassment or grooming on Ephraim's end, the actual messages we were given was just inappropriate behavior. That Light also then went on to say he believes Ephraim was learning from. And while sometimes, yes, victims do not always know that they're being victimized, unless you have more solidified proof of this behavior on Ephraim's end, you cannot therein make the accusation on Light's behalf, because you don't know. You never asked the victim in that situation their perspective. You don't know the extent of their relationship, and you don't even know if they're still pals with each other, so what the fuck are you doing? Plus, unlike Limbo, Ephraim's age gap with Light should also be put into perspective. Light at the time was 17, yes, but Ephraim was 19, and that's only 2 years apart, whereas Limbo was 26 and the person he flirted with, Umbrus, was 9 years younger, also at 17. So, frankly, both you and the posse who works in your name step the fuck off of people like Light and Umbrus, who you simultaneously believe did and did not harass minors. And step the fuck off of Ephraim because you don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, tangent aside, it's not great what Ephraim did. I'm not defending that. I'm not gonna sit here and say that there was a victimless crime here or anything like that because Ephraim was wrong. Especially when he was told to stop. And we have since sat him down to discuss these very behaviors in the SCC courthouse. So to say that I believe otherwise would be dishonest. However, in comparison to literal predators like Halo Fan or genuine creeps like Limbo, Ephraim was rather tame. And while I would, also in Blaze's position, probably remove Ephraim from the premises in case of emergency, even if temporarily, especially if he doesn't have the full context, that should have also extended to the likes of the more dangerous ex-members of the community, which it did not. So the weird double standard is something worth noting. This is something that the rest of the chat does go on to grill him about until a misunderstanding caused him to leave the call, and we will come back to that in due time. Now, there's a lot more you can say about this call on the SCC's end, and trust me, I will. However, I have a structure to this video, and so I must move on to what happened next in the timeline of events leading to Blaze the movie fan's departure. And this is where I'm really disappointed in Blaze, as Blaze starts by making a video called I Screwed Up Big Time and Left the Slideshow Commentary Community. This video was deleted shortly after its upload, and that's an important note to make since he was apparently explicitly told not to do that, as it hides information of the situation from the public doing that. Again, I'll try to focus on the important aspects because I don't wish to be here all day either.
There was going to be a Discord next week, but that has been cancelled. Look, I'm going to say this straight off. This is not going to be a fun video to make. This is not going to be a fun video for you guys to watch. This is more so a video that I have to make more than anything, since I screwed up big time. And normally my videos I swear a lot. But the thing with this is that when I swear a lot in my videos, it's mostly just an internet persona. I'm only do it for entertainment. I don't swear really as much in real life. And with that out of the way, there will be no swearing in this video because I am talking about something very serious. And I honestly feel sad admitted to all of this, but it's unfortunately a very serious video and I have to talk about everything that I'm talking about in this video.
So out of the gate we have a very perturbing introduction to the video. Blaze acknowledges how serious this video is going to be, but instantly sidetracks to how much he's not going to swear in this video. Because that's the important part. Now it's here that an important part of the discussion does need to be raised, because this is something Blaze had done a lot. I've mentioned this before, and I'm not going to really chew his head off about it, but it's still worth noting that he doesn't focus on the important aspects to really any discussion he's having, often opting into unrelated tangents. Now, I too have my moments of tangenting off from time to time. I've arguably done so in this video, and I know I've done so when getting involved in this discussion directly. Like, we had a Senate call and I got Blaze lost in the weeds once or twice. However, I find the difference between myself and Blaze, especially in this moment, is that at least my tangents do relate to general discussion. It's to clarify details that my audience wouldn't readily know unless they're involved and knowledgeable in the inner workings of the SCC. Blaze, however, does not, especially not here. If not swearing was truly important to you, then just don't swear. We do not need to know that you don't intend to. You're not even a minute in and are distracting from the very important topic.
Now, like I said, I screwed up big time earlier today. Since this happened on a private server, I am gonna be pretty vague on what happened.
That's also a problem. Going into the situation vaguely would not tell your audience what you did. It doesn't acknowledge the people you hurt. There were some people in the comment section kind of looking at this video as Blaze taking accountability and owning up to his mistakes, giving Blaze a pat on the back or a slap on the wrist for his apathy and inaction. But if he intends to be vague about it in this video, how much accountability is he taking really? If he's not willing to explicitly acknowledge what he did, how much is he owning up?
Basically, I was concerned that drama was happening every week, and I was counting what Morgan got rightfully called out for as drama. She was basically associating with a groomer, and the grooming victim was on the server. I'm not gonna say the name of the victim because that wouldn't be appropriate. But my main point is, I counted that as drama when it was in fact far more serious. Many people got upset about that, and rightfully so, and I was in a call on that server. I was actually about to leave before people said that I should be in a call. And we were talking about things that I screwed up on in recent years in the Slideshow commentary community. But I left the call early because when people said that I should do something, I made a mistake and thought that they meant that I should leave the server, but they were referring to how I should have blocked GK Smith. I would have loved to continue the conversation, but I don't have access to that server anymore. And honestly, I don't think anyone even wants me back there after everything people pointed out.
So, this is not really a good explanation as to what happened. For starters, Morgan's issue wasn't merely the fact that she was still friends with RCV, though I do feel like that would have eventually come up had the situation in Nexus not occurred. No, the issue was with Morgan going to RCV to try and disprove the allegations against him without properly giving the evidence any proper analysis. She wanted to play neutral but didn't actually do anything for the victim to show that. That's why the situation with Morgan happened. She wanted to defend a groomer, not that she was friends with one. Then Blaze admits why people would want him to cut off CK Smith, being his alleged retweeting of child pornography on Twitter. And this is what I mean by Blaze not really taking accountability or owning up as much as people thought he did. He's skirting around the issue enough to say that he's sorry for something, but never specifying to the extent of what he did. Because of this, the audience cannot decipher the severity of the actions that Blaze is trying to apologize for. However, I will give it to Blaze that he does elaborate somewhat.
Now, I did bring up in another video how I screwed up big time and how there was poor management on my old SCC server. But the gravity of the situation is far more serious than that. I was yet to Umbrus and let her clean up all the mess while I was just sitting there doing nothing. When there was someone causing trouble, I should have banned them on the spot. Yeah, it's my fault that Joshua stayed there for far too long. And I did talk about this a lot already in another video, but I am gonna move on to talk about other things. The worst part is, which I didn't really mention in my video about my SCC server, or at least I think I didn't, is that I let pedophiles stay in the server for months without doing anything. And it's the other admins who had to ban these people.
This is better, kinda, because there's an actual acknowledgement to what he did, leaving dangerous people in his server. Now the audience is kinda caught up, though I do think it should be noted that this more concise explanation is actually shorter than the original one, and is still not, like, super explanative. Maybe it's not as big of an issue as some of the other ones I brought up thus far. Maybe. But it's still an interesting note worth taking.
Honestly, the best way to take accountability for my actions is to just dissociate with the Slideshow commentary community completely. And this is not out of hate for the community or anything like that. In fact, I still respect a lot of people who are in the community. But I know I haven't been doing a good job showing that. What I did on my Slideshow commentary community server was horrible. But it's clear that I didn't learn and also got in some trouble on Doodle's private server.
Now, I'll admit, I did hear this and kind of roll my eyes. Leaving the SCC is a good step, but it's not the only step you should be taking. Because as long as you have a server with minors allowed in it, then you're inherently at risk of doing the exact thing, presuming you learn nothing from the situation. It's the attitude that inherently needs to change, not just the environment. And, unfortunately, given how you present yourself in the rest of this video, I don't have much reason to believe you quite understand that not everything in this situation is about you.
So you know what I decided to do? I was banned from many SCC servers, but I decided to just leave the rest of them on my own, because, yeah, what I did was just inexcusable. Now, I was gonna talk about this in a video sometime after my Christmas themed projects are over, but getting this video up first is far more important than finishing my Christmas themed project. Now, like I said, I was gonna make a video sometime after my Christmas themed project about how one of my New Year resolutions is to stop caring about views period and just make videos that I want to make and for those who enjoy my content. But honestly, I need to work on far more than just that. If I know someone is a groomer or a pedophile, I should just cut ties with them immediately, no excuse. Another issue that has been with me since pretty much when I started in this Let's Go commentary community, which I have been trying to work on to fix, is that I care far too much about getting criticism. I care far too much about people criticizing my stuff. And although some of it is because I want to improve my content, the very reason why I want so many people to criticize my stuff is because I love getting criticism. That's it, that's the major reason. It's not a good reason, not in the very least. In fact, I know that I have been too obsessed with getting criticism for far too long.
Once again, this is not an update video where you tell your audience that your Christmas-themed projects might not come out. This is an announcement that you're leaving the SCC, and it should be an apology, something that is strangely yet unsurprisingly absent from the near 8-minute runtime. But honestly, what can we expect from a situation where the main issue was putting off purging problematic people prodding in particular parts of predatory paraphilia? If Morgan's downfall was her attempts to stay neutral, but not knowing how, Blaze's downfall is his attempts at people-pleasing, leading to an apathy towards optics because of those who he was pals with. I mentioned this before and I'll repeat it here for those in the back, but choosing to be friends with people who you know intend to hurt others or who otherwise do not care if they hurt others tells on you about as much as it does them. And I'm not saying that to be guilt by association-y, because I'm willing to acknowledge some nuance if being friends with the person, like, does something for you, but in most cases it really shows where your morals lay if you know these actions and choose to associate with them. That said, even if that friendship is worth keeping around, call them out if they start doing stuff you don't agree with. Because if you don't, it just shows double standards calling out one person for something that you turn a blind eye to when your friend does it. I get that bias may be a little hard to push past every now and then, but especially in commentary, it's kind of important that you're able to, at least to some degree. Mostly because you want to keep your morals as straight as possible, and while nuance is nice, consistency is important. And hey, if you're anything like Blaze here, who wants to focus on the lesser important things, you can also do it so that the community doesn't get seen as a hive mind anymore. Anyway, all jokes aside, that's really the extent of what I wish to cover with Blaze here. And so as to make sure not everything gets seen with an extreme brush, allow me to take my own advice when covering friends and talk about... Mr. A has been an old friend of the channel, but has also been someone who I have criticized several times in the past. Now, this is the only situation towards the latter part of the year that I'm focusing on in this video that doesn't involve defending potential predators, but I still wish to outline this situation in particular because I want to stress that the worst case scenario is not the only scenario we should be looking at in regards to this communication issue the SCC faces. Because I want to preface that while what I'm going to detail is bad, it's not unrecoverable, at least that's how I feel about the situation. I suppose I'll just detail everything as is and let you and the SCC decide on what to do with the info, but all my cards are out on the table early for this one. So Mr. A's story starts with the Cloak Dagger stuff I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but with the pivot off of Vigil, Tippy, and Key, and more over to Key's ex, Neko Shadows. Now, Neko was one of the people involved who kept Vigil and V's friendship a secret and was promptly removed from a lot of different SCC circles because of that. However, she kept a few of her significant others in touch, which included Mr. A. And, you know, that's his choice ultimately. No one was going to say he can't keep dating her, it's whatever. But that said, now that Neko's was kind of out of the question, people started to look back and notice a few of her more toxic traits. Well, I mean, apparently people always had their grievances with her, but I'm going to try to focus on the specifics here. On August 30th, 2023, Umbrus started a conversation in the Cloud Palace by sharing DMs between her and Neko's that showed Neko's allowing Umbrus into a server of hers only under the prerequisite that Umbrus cannot access the drama chat and cannot fight with anyone there, which I thought seemed a little accusatory. Umbrus said that this was probably fair as it postdated a stunt of hers, probably in reference to something she did when she was younger, as she did kind of have a history of doing that, but then went on to share some other messages. Admittedly, Screenshot 2 and 3 don't have anything super relevant. Screenshot 2 shows them discussing Neko's failure to hide the drama chat from Umbrus, which can happen. I've done something similar before. It can be a simple oversight, so it's whatever. And Screenshot 3 elaborates on that discussion, showing us that Neko's was trying to hide from Umbrus being a discussion about Carmen Rider and Creepshow art, and apparently involved topics of an NSFW nature. So it does start to contextualize the assumptions made on Neko's end in the first screenshot. It starts seeming less like Umbrus is a problematic child, and more, I don't want to let a minor see NSFW topics. Which I think is fair. However, a fourth screenshot that Umbrus showed was one of a sillier nature between the two, involving a fighting game character called Neko Arc. And this one is kind of notable since, if Neko Shadows wanted to keep a minor away from NSFW topics, why would she then insinuate that the Neko Arc version of her Sona would stab a minor's genitals? Maybe could have better thought that implication through. I don't know. Umbrus also brings up the weirdness of presuming that she was simping when making a direct reference to the character's voice lines, which is also weird. Maybe we stop assuming minors are simps. That also might just be me, though. Umbrus continued showing DMs between her and Neko's, and there's not too much with the last two screenshots, but it's around this point that Mr. A showed up to get on Umbrus's case for doing so. And Umbrus merely responds by explaining why she even shared these to begin with, specifically to express how much Neko Shadows would prefer to gossip specifically to Umbrus, and not allow Umbrus to speak her mind otherwise. About a month later, Mr. A came to me to vocalize his grievances with Umbrus, specifically Umbrus's propensity to start talking shit about Nekos. And I'm going to keep this in mind for later. At the time, I told Mr. A to just talk to Umbrus. This seemed like the best course of action for something so simple, though he responded by saying attempting that didn't go so well. What actually happened seems to be more or less kept in the dark, but it doesn't really matter one way or another. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. I gave him my 2 cents and figured that was going to be it. And it was it, until December 11th, 2023. Now, in the Cloud Palace, we have waifu and husbando chats, because the SCC is nothing if not a bunch of fucking weebs. And in there, Mr. A, pretty harmlessly may I add, posted some fan art in the chat of Elfelt Valentine from Guilty Gear Strive, followed by 2 emojis that simply imply some rather lewd thoughts. Umbrus chimed in, saying how uncomfortable she was using those emojis in particular, and when asked why, other people wound up chiming in, trying to better inform Mr. A of what the 2 emojis together imply. Mr. A then turns to me with a vent DM that I could not get to because, reminder, my computer was dead at the time of all this, mentioning that he was wanting to talk to Umbrus about all this. I guess seeing me not reply back had him instead turn to his own chat where the situation really arose. Yeah, turns out talking shit about an 18-year-old in a different chat is rather frowned upon, isn't it? So it starts with Mr. A saying more or less the same thing about Umbrus that he did in my DMs, though specifically mentioning how not frequent it is that he even posts in the husbando and waifu chats to begin with. Now, I have 2 approaches to this that I want to cover. The first being that it doesn't really matter how frequently you post there. If someone tells you they're uncomfortable, you don't get to dictate their comfort levels by rarity. That's just something to acknowledge, apologize for, and not repeat going forward. Now yeah, I will say, Umbrus should have maybe elaborated on her discomfort when Mr. A asked, so at least that way he'd be able to understand his problems better than just having other people jump on his case for it. But him just kind of dismissing Umbrus's comfort level like that is kind of cringe. Second, obviously with what we're going to be talking about all segment, Mr. A really should have taken my advice in this situation and, talked to Umbrus. Reach out and discuss this, because this is a really easy discussion to have if you're just willing to listen to each other. Which, yeah, might mean nothing would come from it. But you won't ever know if you don't try. Because as is, all you wind up doing in this situation is spread gossip around to other people who, as we can see, hold some sort of weird grudge against her from the beginning. Enter Sugar Pie, who once made a bad commentary and never fucking recovered from the backlash it got. Never. She obviously still salty, even as of now, as we can blatantly see within the screenshot here, because that was her instinctive reason to dislike Umbrus here. Not because of any actual problematic things Umbrus may have done, no, just that she didn't like the video she made, and might have had some bad criticisms of it. She's going to be especially annoying within this conversation. Spoiler alert. Now, continuing on, Mr. A does clarify that even despite their differences, especially in regards to Neko Shadows, the 2 can coexist within the Cloud Palace, which honestly, I guess is mature of Mr. A, as low as the bar as that is to reach. And also, I'll give him this, the idea of simping in the simp chat, yeah, that's not that bad either. That's almost as if that's the point. Of course, Umbrus's issue stems from the specific emojis used to simp in the simp chat, not the inherent action of simping to begin with, so he doesn't quite fully understand. Though I can't really blame him when he did try communicating confusion only to be ghosted in favor of others jumping on him instead. Sugar then follows with her own grievances of Umbrus, talking about a situation from 2018 where she was accused of doxing, another situation I covered back in the day, another complaint about being criticized poorly, and Umbrus's concern over piracy being posted in a Discord server some vague time ago. It's worth noting that Umbrus only turned 18 within the past year, so whatever gripes Sugar Pie had with a literal child, it certainly says more about her than it does Umbrus. Like, I have my own criticisms with Umbrus. I don't think she's a perfect little angel, and I have certainly side-eyed her during her grow-up period at times. But at the end of the day, for the majority of her time in the SCC, she was a child. And I mean an actual child. Not in the same sense as how Sugar is acting within this discussion. Sugar also claims that Umbrus is purposely vindictive because she doesn't gel with someone who, prior, got onto her case for criticizing the actions of someone who was openly toxic to be around. This is where we meet JP Bones. I do not know this man. He also does not know Umbrus. And that'll be important later. Sugar then goes on a tirade about how bad Umbrus is, again, this time focusing on Umbrus's distance to Sugar, who, if I can put it bluntly, doesn't seem like a reasonable or rational person in the fucking slightest, which was not just foreseen throughout that video she's dying on the hill of, but also just here in this conversation, she's accused Umbrus of being vindictive and manipulative over some disagreements the two had in the past over, frankly, petty things. Genuinely, it appears to me that Sugar cannot handle any sense of critique or pushback in the slightest without going on the offensive, which is another point of reference that I do wish to point out in regards to the overall sentiment shared in this video over the SCC's communication issues. If you can't handle even the slightest amount of disagreement without pitching a fit over it and assuming the worst of your opposition, maybe you shouldn't be around people who critique and debate. Just saying. Then, Sugar mentions some situation about an ID policy to prevent minors in SFW chats. It's pretty vague and God knows how long ago it was. I know the second situation she was referring to where Umbrus pretended to be someone harassing her. Umbrus was like, maybe 15 at the time of that. But in Sugar's words, she shows signs of holding grudges, so it must still be fair game, I guess. Though that's rich coming from the woman who's doing the exact thing in this very chat. By the way, should remind you, all the things Mr. A was coming into the chat with was something that happened the same day, and maybe ties into something that happened maybe a few months prior. Unless you're trying to get onto Umbrus's case for the Neko Shadow screenshots themselves, but literally at that point, Umbrus was talking about a pattern of behavior that continued well into 2023. Whereas Sugar, at best, is just butt mad that she got criticism on a video she made a couple years ago now. So who's really holding the grudge? You, by now, might be noticing a particular shift in target. Whereas the chapters about Mr. A, I'm doing a lot of focusing on Sugar Pie, and there's a reason for that. That reason being that, frankly, Mr. A doesn't do a ton of talking in this conversation. He opened the floor to other people, and they took it from him. Sugar especially. And Sugar, frankly, is the worst one in this conversation, taking the absolutely least charitable interpretations of things Umbrus had said about her video, relaying these old childish actions as points against her in bad faith, and generally poisoning the well for people like JP, who doesn't really know Umbrus that well, but helps develop a negative reaction of her through these accusations and this petty grudge holding. Now yes, I can blame Mr. A for this, and I will. Not only because he opened the floor to this one-sided discussion to begin with, but as is, he's allowing Sugar to portray this negative image of Umbrus without question. In part because he seems to agree with these very same notions, showing that he too has a negative opinion of Umbrus that's predicated on misinterpretation or generally bad faith. Keep this in mind for later. And I guess of course he would. Umbrus did talk shit about his girlfriend, so it makes sense, even if this whole thing seems frustrating. Anyway, back to the discussion. Sugar also takes this time to not only throw a stray at Fractured Light for God knows why, then, back on the note of Umbrus, brings up another grievance involving a Sonic trailer reaction that, when looked into, was a miscommunication that Luxor helped clear up. However, this, to Sugar, is a conspiracy that tells her Umbrus only follows her account to dunk on her, and when the concept of blocking Umbrus pops up, she starts worrying that it's gonna start something, like, bro, what is your damage? Even if you don't want to give her the satisfaction of being blocked by someone who she allegedly hate follows, Twitter has an option to mute people so you don't see their posts specifically. In fact, I do that on Twitter more than I block people. Plus, as much as I hate to admit it to JP, he has a point. That if Umbrus starts something over being blocked, it would look far worse on her than it would you, and furthermore, it would look pretty bad on anyone who decides to antagonize you for it. The option of the block button is there for a reason, and anyone who wants to make it a game of how quickly you can block them is a douchebag. Plain and simple. Even if she was not the intended target, Sugar actually makes a really solid case study over the kind of behavior this chapter alludes to being Mr. A's problem. That being mistrust and paranoia. Sugar looks at things only in extremes, and because of that appears to want to avoid any pushback or confrontation in a situation, no matter how small. Like, even this bout of criticism in this video, I guarantee she'll label as an attack on her character instead of a critique of her actions and statements. That's just the impression I get from her looking at how she handled this. But to make it clear out of the gate, I don't know Sugar from a more personal level, I'm just analyzing the frankly abhorrent way she came into this discussion. And here's a general tip that I've heard when getting into arguments like this. When presented with a choice of ignorance or malice, choose ignorance, because unless you have solidified evidence of the contrary, you cannot know someone's intentions. That's what I did with both Blaze and Morgan, who did far worse things than Sugar did. With that said, I have no reason to believe that Sugar is doing this in anything except malice, as her statements make it pretty clear where she stands on the matter. She is spiteful through and through. She hates Umbrus. There's nothing but bad blood there. When Mr. A came into the chat, he was venting frustrations at Umbrus' actions, and while he was under the presumption that Umbrus didn't like him, it wasn't to the point of calling Umbrus vindictive and manipulative. Sugar did, and for the pettiest reasons. Also, when asked to possibly get into a call to discuss matters, she allegedly claimed that there wasn't going to be an impartial third party in that call, as if the admins of the courthouse are all against her or something, so while I don't exactly have proof of that sentiment, if it is true, it also tells me that she's not willing to discuss matters. She just wants to wild poison, so I guess we can call this a self-fulfilling prophecy, if nothing else. Anyway, these chat logs were leaked into the Cloud Palace, and a discussion was raised pretty instantly. Fireball PT taking the lead by demanding Mr. A give his reasons for not liking Umbrus in the chat where they can see it, instead of going behind Umbrus's back to a chat that she's not in to shit-talk her. Luckster brings up the fact that this wasn't exactly behind closed doors because Mr. A's server is public, and then Umbrus comes in saying both that's worse, and then bringing up a situation that happened between them from 2020, only now giving Sugar's claim of Umbrus holding grudges some leverage. Apparently, during 2020, a bunch of abusive ex-commentators once dragged Umbrus into a call to yell at her, and apparently Mr. A not only did nothing, but egged it on. Umbrus also says that she doesn't want to say that Mr. A is complicit in the abuse, and she's not going to. She's just going to heavily insinuate that he was, by claiming Mr. A egged it on. Now, I should also mention that Umbrus prior acknowledged, in the conversation about Neko Shadows, that she had a bit of a problematic streak growing up, because of course she would. And while I'm not going to sit here and claim that this call was justified, I don't know the details of it, but if it traumatized Umbrus, it probably couldn't have been. But if Mr. A was off on the sidelines or otherwise wasn't involved in anything beyond maybe saying that call should have happened, I think maybe demanding an apology only now when he's already in hot water is maybe unfair. I mean, generally, I kind of have to raise an eyebrow over the sudden demand of an apology from something 3 years ago anyway. Because by this point, Umbrus and Mr. A have been in chats with each other for years, and have talked directly to each other on a few occasions, specifically to air out grievances. And it's never once come up? It's only coming up now because people have an issue with Mr. A now, and I think that's maybe piling on more than is necessary. Furthermore, it seems a bit opportunistic to paint Mr. A in a worse light than he might have been in. Again, I'm not saying this call was right for abusers. It most likely wasn't. I'm mostly just bringing up the timing of this conversation and the way that it is framed because Umbrus makes it seem a bit more important than it realistically is here. When demanded of a response, Mr. A claims that he's trying to gather his thoughts, a notion that's quickly mocked by user Daisy Foxtrot. But hold on, you all have just piled on at least 4 or 5 different talking points out of the gate from Umbrus' initial call-out post. You all have effectively gish-galloped Mr. A into a corner before he might have even seen the messages in the Cloud Palace. Furthermore, Daisy claims that Mr. A had his thoughts in check well over in the other chat, as if everyone who vocalizes their frustrations in a vent had thought about it beforehand and don't just vocalize their at-the-time frustrations when venting. Come on, you all use the vent chat that way. I've seen several people go in there with intrusive thoughts. Again, I'm not saying it was right of Mr. A to do that, but let's not act as if this wasn't an impulsive move to get it out of the system. Plus, again, Mr. A doesn't do a lot of talking in that conversation. Sugar did. Mr. A was merely the catalyst for Sugar to start on that rant, and the most he contributed post-frustrations about Umbrus's discomfort was to say that he too thought Umbrus didn't like him, and to tell Sugar to finally just block her. To say that I feel like this could have been handled with more tact is an understatement, if you can't tell. Umbrus then mentions that she has more evidence against Mr. A, sharing a few screenshots of a conversation between he and Fractured Light about a user called the Conundrum. Not sure I can recall what that's all about, it's been a couple years, but between Mr. A and Light, Umbrus is a victim in whatever this situation was. So I'm not sure what this evidence is supposed to prove. Maybe it's that Mr. A was aware of the abuse, but I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that information. Yeah, it was in his server, and he could have maybe prevented it, but friendly reminder that Umbrus claimed Mr. A egged this abuse on, when the screenshots she's posting here kinda contradict that notion, as we see Mr. A vocalize his disapproval of it. Plus, we also have to acknowledge the date this conversation was being had, May of 2022, at least a year after Degenerate's call-out post to the Conundrum, and 2 years after the abuse took place to begin with. So there's a chance that Mr. A was merely made aware of this situation after the fact, or looks back on it with some level of disdain for the individuals involved, which only adds to my question of relevance here. Not only is this a situation from 3 years ago that Umbrus is holding Mr. A to, but it's a situation she can see Mr. A also held negative feelings towards. So, barring just demanding an apology for being a bystander, what is she expecting us to do? Eventually, Mr. A gave a response that was rather lukewarm, telling us that he actually did totally disagree with Sugar's rants about Umbrus, and that he didn't think too much about the feelings he'd be over by the end of the day anyway. Which was quickly argued. If Mr. A didn't have objections to Sugar's rants, why didn't he stop her from poisoning the well of JP? Umbrus then brings the discussion back around to the discomfort surrounding the emoji usage in the simp chat, and finally explains on her end what actually left her uncomfortable. Something she absolutely should have done from the very beginning to clear up any miscommunication between the two of them. Mr. A then tries to fight back to that, replying to the wrong message, and here's where I really get upset at the Cloud Palace for their mishandling of things, because for fuck's sake, guys, your double standards are showing. Space Guru 5 responds to Mr. A's flub-up, acknowledging the stress Mr. A is probably under, but then turns that back around on Mr. A in favor of Umbrus by accusing him of being the source of stress directly in return, ignoring how it was 8363 MTR who was the one that made Umbrus aware of Mr. A's venting in the first place. Plus, not forget that y'all were the ones who put Mr. A under that stress to begin with by trying to rush out a response from him from the beginning, all the while dogpiling him with extra questions you wanted him to respond to. So why is Umbrus's lack of communication getting a pass while Mr. A's floundering gets heavily scrutinized? Oh, because Umbrus is obviously the victim here. And it couldn't be a matter of miscommunication between the two of them. No siree! Jace brings up how we shouldn't be holding things against Umbrus right now because Umbrus's dog passed a week prior. But if that was the case, why have this event to begin with and not wait for Umbrus to be more mentally okay to have this discussion? Why is this Mr. A's fault? Because he vented an electrical? You guys have every right to wait until one of the parties involved is more mentally sound to have these discussions. Then, Luxter brings up Cloak and Dagger as a point of reference directly, basically telling Mr. A that if he had a problem with either Sugar or Umbrus, then he should make those feelings known. A sentiment I do agree with. Umbrus then claims that Sugar cited one of Umbrus's abusers, and the only instance I could maybe call to was when Sugar said that she helped Dual Taku write a script about Umbrus's stance on the ID policy thing, but that's not a citation, that's just a mention of one of Umbrus's abusers through the lens of what Sugar helped propagate. She, by her own admission, was already against Umbrus's stance. Not that she was only against Umbrus's stance once Taku made a video about it. So, what we're not going to do is pull a Neko Koda here on Sugar and criticize her for even mentioning you and your abuser in the same breath. There's far more valid reasons to critique Sugar in the situation. She, by no means, is innocent, but we don't need to lie about those who are a problem. Then the chat turns to the I'm so tired of people shit-talking Umbrus train, with others going down the path of why are you dismissing Umbrus's trigger, and with one of these, I agree wholeheartedly, but I both simultaneously agree with and have a problem with how the other is implemented in this conversation. People do shit-talk Umbrus a lot. In fact, Mr. A agrees with that, as we saw in the DMs between he and Fractured Light. Mr. A makes note of how ever since Umbrus joined this community, she's been in a lot of drama, frequently not by her own volition. Plus, if I may, it's mostly for shit she did when she was a kid. I don't think that's right. Like, kids will be dumb. That is the universal constant. I highly doubt y'all were actually the ever-mature and intelligent creatures you pretend to be when you were younger. You probably made a handful of dumb decisions and mistakes growing up. It happens. And I don't think expecting someone who was around toxic people at the age of 14 to never do it dumb is reasonable or smart. sugar. There's a point where you gotta let things go, and with Umbrus, there is more of that than there is not, because very frequently the stuff she did in the community was the result of bad influence around her. People sexting with her at the age of 11 or 12. People using her to forward attacks on others, only to watch her get hit back full force. And then God knows how much abuse she faced directly at the hands of V Omega for merely making bad content, something he was prone to let get to his head. So in a general sense, I too am tired of people shit-talking Umbrus. That's the part I wholeheartedly agree with. Now, for the second point. I think by now people know my stance on triggers. I try to respect them as much as I can. I don't want to hurt people with what I put in my content, so when potentially triggering stuff appears within my content, I do very much try to warn people ahead of time. In fact, y'all might have noticed the additional trigger warnings on Cloak and Dagger that were added when someone brought it to my attention that I failed to label yelling in one of them. I think generally that if someone has trauma towards something, that we should be mindful of it going forward. However, I do also believe that, and I think this is something that we should all also acknowledge, discomfort is not on the same level as PTSD. Like, I'm uncomfortable remembering Ski Hound because of the shit that I went through in 2017 they helped cause. But I would not at all consider them to be a trigger. If something causes you genuine stress, you're really going to need to communicate that more clearly, which was not something Umbrus did within this chat. And I'm sure that Mr. A would have been more receptive to it, and not so bloody confused, had Umbrus just started with, hey, over-sexualization is a trigger of mine, cut it out, but instead what we got was tone it down, I'm uncomfortable with your usage of emoji. Given the history of conflict the two of them had, I'm not really surprised that Mr. A walked away with a feeling like this might have been a targeted thing against him. When something like this arises, for us third parties, sometimes you need to communicate the problem more clearly. In Mr. A's case, that's especially so, since, as we saw within the initial chat post, he didn't feel like he used it all that frequently to begin with in the Cloud Palace. So there's obvious miscommunication happening here. Like, for all we know, he would have respected this boundary regardless. He wasn't really given much time to prove how receptive he was about it all at the end of the day anyway. But his frustration is obviously rooted in the confusion he was left with in the vague complaint raised his way. Like, I don't feel like that's asking for too much for just a little clarification, and jumping on him for wanting that I don't think is very fair of anyone in the Cloud Palace who did. We come back around to the stuff from 2020 that Umbrus demanded an apology for earlier, where Mr. A tries to explain his side of the story, where he did tell Umbrus's abusers to tone it down, even if he felt the conversation was necessary, which was exactly what I thought it was going through these for the first time. Now, while the criticism of Mr. A being a bad mediator is a valid one, especially if that was ultimately allowed to happen, Umbrus trying to shut down Mr. A's defense is not valid, because you guys were asking for a defense, and he's giving one. Whether or not it's good is up for debate, but trying to shut him down is only stifling any productivity. Now yes, the victim in the situation tries to claim that Mr. A participated in the abuse, so as mentioned before, we probably should actively listen. However, at this point, it's really only he said, she said with no evidence beyond anecdotal, and combined with Umbrus's earlier statements of Mr. A being a bystander and it all leaving this new claim of being an active participant contradictory, I'm actually more inclined to believe Mr. A in the situation than Umbrus. Which might not be exactly the popular approach to this, but I do have my reasons, and unfortunately we'll have to come back to that much later in the video, as it's more important there. So this is getting a little dragged out and is only the first of two conversations the Cloud Palace had about this, so I'm just going to put a cap on this part here. At the end of the day, Mr. A rewrote Rule 6 of his server from Be Civil to Don't Instigate Conflict, and that seemed to be okay with people enough to drop the subject. I mean, the conversation went on for 2 days, so I don't know. The second conversation starts up with Azelf 101, and also starts much better than the previous one did. Whereas Umbrus came in swinging at Mr. A, Azelf just raises concerns about Mr. A's behavior, talking about how his feelings towards the Cloud Palace is a bit worrisome. Then Umbrus and Jace come in to jump on Mr. A's case more aggressively. Specifically, Umbrus points to 2 messages of Mr. A where he says, firstly, that he wants to talk things out with me, but cannot, as at the time my computer was busted, but continued to talk about how he feels as if Neko Shadows won't ever really be allowed back into the SCC spaces due to the controversy she faced, specifically citing when Umbrus was talking about her in the Cloud Palace vent channel. We'll come back to that. The second message Umbrus highlights is Mr. A feeling as if he's no longer welcomed in the Cloud Palace, and after that last conversation, I don't blame him, actually. You guys were terrible to him. But Umbrus is surely going to, because she was the first one to start making allegations against Mr. A, saying that he's actively lying about her stance on Nekkos. Despite the fact that not only did Umbrus once again not make that clear in the initial conversation, friendly reminder, but what she did give was a bunch of screenshots about how Neko Shadows is a toxic person to be around, leaving Mr. A to interpret Umbrus's feelings about her. When Mr. A finally fights back, finally snaps back at Umbrus, I get why. Umbrus, and to extend Jace because he also got involved. Look, I love you, buddy, but this needs to be said. Neither of you gave any reason for Mr. A to feel like he can actually discuss his problems more freely. In the original conversation, you both were very quick to jump to the worst interpretations, and very quick to assume the intent of the guy, trying to shove him into a corner so he couldn't defend himself. You both seemed pretty offended when he said that he didn't feel like he'd be listened to, but actually look back at how you treated him in the first conversation. Jace got so angry he had to turn away from the conversation due to a headache, and Umbrus, well, just look back at the whole chapter up to this point. I think I made it very clear why Umbrus isn't totally innocent here. But anyway, Mr. A tries to turn this around and brings it back from the top, trying to converse with Umbrus and the courthouse admin, where he attempts to details why he didn't go to either in this specific scenario. Jace apparently told Mr. A straight up to keep his distance and that Jace had spoken his piece prior, giving Mr. A the impression that there wasn't any more discussion to be had with him. Then turns to Umbrus to try and explain why Nekkos' account of this situation winds up being pretty vague, being that Nekkos is apparently in the hospital and due to unforeseen circumstances couldn't be around Mr. A for the whole explanation. To which Umbrus then brought up how Mr. A had enough time to talk shit in his server, never mind the when Mr. A brings up following this reply, never mind how he was the one that didn't have time to give Neko Shadows a whole rundown when she's only got an hour online and something came up, never mind how this doesn't actively involve Neko Shadows at all and her not knowing every facet of Mr. A venting about Umbrus isn't that big of a deal since it doesn't really involve her, but maybe that's just my personal stance on the matter. Then they get on Mr. A's case for assuming that everyone in the server hates him, which, again, it's not that he didn't have a reason to believe that, emphasized by what happened when he did ask, and basically everyone in the Cloud Palace who was paying attention to the vent chat at the time said they didn't trust him anymore. Like, yeah, I'm glad y'all are honest about this, but what are we supposed to do with this information now that it's kind of obvious, or at least made obvious enough by the last discussion the group had? I'm extremely frustrated, and I can't imagine how Mr. A feels about this. I've been doing a lot of criticizing of my own group and not really focusing on Mr. A all that much, so I'll give you this. Mr. A did have a problem, and that was that he let paranoia get the better of him. Going into his private server to vent about another person is one thing. We've all done that. In the group, sometimes. And while it's not a great thing in the long run, I understand that merely venting tends to just be there to get these feelings out of your system then and there, and might not result in long-term problems. Probably shouldn't do it to people who are more bad faith about the person, but I get it. That said, his sidelining during Sugar's rampage came as a result of that paranoia. He thought Umbrus was vehemently against Neko Shadows. He thought Umbrus hated him, so he jumped to those actions as a result, and decidedly not talked out the issues that he might have had with Umbrus in fear of further pissing her off. That worry of him being ostracized from the group caused a self-fulfilling prophecy, as he had since been removed from the group. In part, because there did need to be something said about his repeated bad behavior. But also in part because, like, a good chunk of the group vocalized their distrust of the guy. But I'm not mad at him for his worry and concern. I am a bit disappointed that he did nothing to actually confirm or invalidate those beliefs. That's not exactly a healthy way to live, but I'm not mad. Because, especially looking at how the Cloud Palace treated him in my absence, I get it. It's not great that you don't seem to remember my advice, but the Cloud Palace didn't really do themselves any favor in this situation. Still, you should try harder to have these kind of conversations when they are important, and maybe one day you'll be able to rebuild that trust that you had lost with seemingly everyone else in the group. I also wanted to detail the situation too, again, stress that the worst case scenario isn't always what we should be looking at when it comes to our communication skills. Mr. A is not an extreme example, as his problems came in the form of something everyone in this community does from time to time. We're not always going to get along, not at all. But we can at least be mature enough to face our issues head-on every once in a while and talk things out with another, especially if it's not an isolated problem. It's here that I want to stress, most, if not all of the SCC is guilty of this. Every person has a problem with talking things out, either from distancing themselves from conflict, being quite two-faced with each other, jumping the gun and antagonizing each other, and so on and so forth. It's not something we should be proud of, and it's something we should be striving to fix in ourselves, because if we don't, and we just get angry and ostracize everyone who even remotely has a problem with another, what does that say about our community? About a community who, reminder, constantly criticizes each other for bad videos we make. Why does it only stop at multi-degrees, guys? It's especially annoying to be sitting here right now and making what amounts to the most in-depth SCC rant this community has ever seen, especially as the owner of a group that had this exact problem throughout the year prior. For those in the Cloud Palace who don't remember what I'm talking about, Ellie. Remember when Buggy and Echo Shadows both told Ellie to pick a better time to grieve her dead father on his birthday? Remember when you all jumped to the accusation that artist Taco Draws was into incest, and when Ellie called y'all out for jumping to awful conclusions? Azzy, Daisy, you both called her holier than thou for pointing out how we're commentators and should research this shit better. Ellie left the community in part because y'all treated her like shit when she did call this stuff out. You guys didn't want confrontation when someone did have a genuine problem, and it showed. And good God, some of y'all haven't learned to listen or treat each other with respect. Anytime there's been a situation that's maybe a little more serious and needs to be talked out, you jump to either aggression or passiveness, and neither are particularly good in these kinds of situations. For those in the Cloud Palace especially, there's a 2.5-hour call linked in the bulletin board over the current polls. I suggest you listen to it. I need to take a portion out by request of Ellie before that goes anywhere public, if it even needs to be, but y'all can listen to it in all its glory because it's specifically pointed at you. That's not the only thing we've directly had discussions about post-Cloak and Dagger, nor is it the only instance of someone's inability to approach a situation with any sort of tact. To give another direct example, Solar Finnerer went into a chat to make a direct insinuation of wrongdoing on my end, saying that I poked far more hornet's nests than he or Tippy, and the worst that I got was, quote, annoying comments. I dragged him directly into a call to shed some light on some of the other stuff that I went through, specifically in regards to Sherman, who, if you recall, doxed me all throughout 2020 and 2021. It did get worse, by the way, but I don't exactly know how much I can legally discuss about all that, so I'll just share with you what I know that I can share. Finrear, I have had a wellness check called on me. Apparently, from what I gathered, from someone, in the FBI, because that happened shortly after I gave them messages regarding Sherman. My life was threatened to a point where the FBI thought that I needed a wellness check. The exact messages, I can read them out because I did find them.
Go ahead.
We're between this person called Mark and another person by the name of Concordia. Mark says, tell Doodletones to unblock me. Concordia says, why should I? Mark says, because she wants me. She won't be able to block me in real life. Her place looks pretty, not gonna lie, with a picture of my house. Because, remember, Sherman was doxing me. These people had that information. It then continues, Concordia going, she clearly doesn't, I don't think anyone does. Mark goes, she's in denial. Once we meet one another, she'll understand. Concordia goes, what do you intend to do? Mark says, I already said what I'm going to do. Concordia says, I concur. You know, it's a shame, really. Feeling the need to force yourself onto a woman to make yourself look better. And then Mark says, I'm not going to force myself onto her since it'll be consensual. She just doesn't know it yet. Mark posts another picture of my house and says, I wonder if she'll keep her windows locked tonight. Now, Finnerer backed off. Finnerer went and apologized in a video after the whole ordeal, so I'm not upset with him or anything. I mostly bring this up for context since we can use this to pivot towards the Efromentator who wanted to grill Finnerer for a bit more than I did. I guess that's it from me. Does anyone else have questions?
I have quite a few, actually. I would.
Go ahead.
I call dibsies. So first off, I want to point out that the second you came in here, Susie quoted something you said, and you said that it came across as that way. It didn't come across as jack or shit. It's just what you said. I want to get that out there right now. But the other thing I wanted to add is, and I asked you this in TSSCC, and you have not yet responded to me. You said not at all what I'm saying, just that people have done that so many times that I don't know if some text threats are threats. So you don't know if some threats are threats? Seems pretty obvious to me that a threat is a threat, personally. Can you explain that to me? Maybe I just don't get it.
I won't go over all the details of this call, mostly because I've been working on this video longer than I expected, and I don't feel like combing through more half-hour-long voice call archives for what I'm trying to find, but Ephraim did seem to go into this call to really corner Fenrir with the minutia, and I'm not sure what the intended end result was, but it was definitely a lot harder on him than even I, as the person who was being targeted with these statements, thought was really necessary. Between Ephraim and I, he does wind up apologizing for getting too angry in a discussion pretty commonly, and while I get that maybe getting one's anger in check isn't always something someone can do, and sometimes it's justified, absolutely, but when it becomes a common problem, maybe it's best to try to find coping mechanisms or way of calming yourself down, because getting angry at someone in a discussion doesn't always allow for a really productive conversation. Look no further than the example of the Blaze the Movie fan call.
Also, answer Light's fucking question.
How old are you?
I am 30. I am 35.
30 fucking 5.
Yeah.
I am basically half your fucking age, and I am also dealing with this while I am sick. And honestly, I shouldn't be dealing with this. I should be in bed resting, but here I am. Why can I think about this? Why can I be more... I don't know. How can I use more common sense than you? I'm 19.
How is it that people like Slumber and Pepper, who are literally half your age, are much better at composing themselves and handling these situations than a 35-year-old man?
Told you we'd come back to this. So, as much as I do have criticisms of Blaze and his dismissal, I think it's more important to acknowledge the other parties in this call and how they treat Blaze in this discussion. Being really poorly. I've mentioned some of those examples already, but stuff like the clip I just played really look bad as a third party. Like, do you guys expect berating the guy this callously to help him better understand what he even did wrong and not just want to shell up? Blaze barely even talks in this call because everyone is too busy trying to hammer in the same few points ad nauseum with insults and condescending attitudes sprinkled in. It's something I look back on in the original Cloak and Dagger calls and have to admit I'm a bit regretful of. Because at that point it's not a discussion, it's a verbal noyad. It's a spectacle being made of individuals for entertainment purposes rather than being a productive but stern conversation where the guilty party can walk away knowing what it is they did wrong. Absolutely, Key and Tippy would have been ostracized either way. Nobody should be around toxic people, and both are frankly very toxic. But Blaze is just, for a lack of a better word, ignorant and had a hard time internalizing any critique he was ever given, rather historically. Which is a problem, but it's not malice, and in my opinion shouldn't really be treated as such. You kinda need to be able to read a situation when going into it and figure out if anger is really justified at the end of the day. Because if it's not, and you're just berating someone for doing it dumb, then that person might not see any reason to really internalize or even want to listen to what you have to say. It's why, as another example, we often don't take someone who parades as a pariah of the SCC very seriously, because we can tell that person isn't going into a discussion in good faith, even if they are correct. Are they really doing this for the good of informing the person where they went wrong, or are they just doing this to kick a person down and make them regret existing on the internet? The person being criticized isn't going to know the actual intentions, and the actions of the critic isn't going to give them anything but an assumption to go off of. Like, we, as viewers, will know why someone like Lio Convoy raises his voice to people in Senate calls. It's usually because those he deals with are an actual danger to those around them, and in that sense, so is Blaze. But the other person isn't going to have that knowledge, and when the discussion is, Blaze said something head-ass, trying to be Lio Convoy Jr. is maybe a little misplaced. Light.
Why did you at all think it was okay to put the blame on Susie's management? When this has had not only nothing to do with her management of the server, but during 2 of these 3 situations, in one of them, Doodle was in the emergency room. She was in surgery. And this time, which you are currently aware of, by the way, her computer died, and she is unable to really contact us and manage the server. So why did you at all think it was okay to put the blame on her? Because you can't even say that you didn't do that because you said twice that Susie failed.
Well, The thing is, I was worried.
You better find your tongue.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I was worried that the server wasn't doing well, and I admit I was wrong in that comment, but the reason I thought it was okay is because I was worried that the server wasn't doing so good, and yeah, I shouldn't have blamed her for it.
God, and don't even get me started on call etiquette. Like, normally in a conversation face to face, you can usually see when someone has something to say, like there's usually a tell. But online, you kind of need to be more cautious about it and practice not talking over each other, not interrupting each other if there's going to be any form of discussion, not just productive ones. But people in the SCC are fucking atrocious at call etiquette. If not people like Tokanium, who will frequently interrupt to say next to nothing at all, you get moments like these where no one is here to wrangle everyone back in, and so it turns into a downright overwhelming mess.
Blaze, you continued hanging out around me last year when a lot of the community thought that I was a bad person, and that meant a lot to me. It really did. But I always was under the assumption you did so because you didn't think I was one. With your comments today, I have to ask, did you think I wasn't one, or did you just not care if I was one? Does that make sense to anybody but me?
Yes. That's actually a great jumping off point to.
No. I want an answer.
No.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, after Blaze answers, I have a jumping off point.
Blaze, answer.
You said what? Are you asking if I thought you were an SCC member? Is that what you were asking?
No! Where the fuck did you get that? No.
Everybody else.
Okay, everyone.
Blaze doesn't understand because Blaze doesn't understand in anything but floatful speak. So
we're not doing this fucking bullshit gag shit. I'm
No,
asking
no,
the
we're
question
not.
correctly.
Everyone,
we're not doing
everyone.
this.
Hey.
Call etiquette,
We need
dumbass.
call etiquette.
Don't fucking take that tone with me, Efron, because I'll take it back with you. Shut the fucking hell up.
Light.
Enough.
Call etiquette.
My bad?
If calls just devolve into shouting matches between the participants involved, then yeah, that's gonna need to be called out as unproductive at best and a downright problem at worst. This is something else that we, as commentators, tend to call out when it happens in videos, but seem to only know how to approach it as such. So, for those watching this, if you're one of the people that this is directed at, I thank you for watching. I can't imagine you've been exactly comfortable with the lack of censorship throughout, but cutting into a conversation is not that much different from cutting into the middle of a point in a video to argue something that you might wind up getting debunked later. You don't want to cut off your opposition because they might have said something you disagree with out of the gate. You probably want them to finish talking so you can argue against it. For instance...
And also, like, Blaze, I understand you're on the spectrum, but also you're 30-something. I don't know the precise age, but point is, you're in your 30s. You should know better.
No. Actually, I'm also on the spectrum, and I know better too. And I'm also younger.
Blaze, could you give me your exact age?
Listen, I don't support what RGB did to you. In fact, I do think it's fucking terrible.
Then why did you call it drama? Then why did you call it drama?
Blaze mentions here that he doesn't support what RCV did to Habit, mostly because the call kinda acts as if he does. Efron.
Blaze, when did anybody say you did?
No one did.
Then why did you mention that?
Going back to what I said before, you have to understand that intentions and motivations are not always going to be obvious, especially when there is an obvious barrier with communication such as Blaze has. You all focusing on the fact he called it drama, claiming he was undermining what RCV had done, would look to someone like Blaze as if you're trying to say that he doesn't care or otherwise supports what RCV had done to happen. As much as we want to get onto Mr. A's case for reading a situation poorly between him and Umbrus, sometimes those bad reads are where someone's mind is going to go, especially when they're left to read a room. Now, we don't know for sure why Blaze was bringing it up to begin with. My theory is only that. But if you would let him finish, we might have been able to see where he was going to come from. But because he said something y'all didn't like, you wanted to counter it quickly and shut down any further elaboration. Because, here's the thing. There could be valid reasons as to why Blaze called it what he did at the end of the day. We know Blaze is Icelandic, and while he can speak English coherently enough, there might still be a language barrier between him and us. And there just might have been no other word in his mind to describe it other than drama. And frankly, that might have been why he had a hard time internalizing critique at the end of the day. We, however, won't know that if you cut him off like that, or pile on questions like that, or make remarks that insinuate allegations against him like that. We can't act like there's no reason at all for him to bring up a defense, so let's not, right? I also might have to condemn you guys for your approach to the CK Smith stuff to begin with. Because you guys should know that an allegation like he retweeted child pornography publicly would be something that might have to be better proven. So I actually did go to CK Smith's Twitter to verify this, and it took a while, but I did find some weird shit retweeted. There was a pink shonen post where one of the characters sounds 12 despite being 18, and while it is a bit gross, I guess there's nothing necessarily immoral there. It's just weird, I think. However, there's some implied shit with Star Butterfly that CK can't even justify as fictional since he's also one to retweet people saying that lolicon is pedophilia, so, that's something to side-eye. Not to mention Twincest. Just enough said. So, like, you guys do have a case, but I'm starting to wonder if Blaze even knew of these examples, or if you guys just told him CK Smith done this and expect him to believe it outright. And I ask this because of the way that this was approached throughout the call didn't let Blaze retort or give any sort of reaction. And after a while, it seems more guilty until proven innocent.
Actually, speaking... sorry, Habit, you go ahead, actually.
No, I just want to say, it's interesting that you ban, like, Ephraim. So, like, I don't know everything, everything here. Like, again, I've only come back recently, and I'm still picking up, like, learning things as I go. But the fact that Ephraim got banned and immediately, yet you dragged your heels and are still friends with someone who portrayed a fucking predatory fucking behavior. What the fuck?
I'm sorry, Umbrus, I know you were gonna say something, but you know, it's really great to be able to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, that's a good quality to have. Unless, you know, they're fucking... Did someone say that the person was reposting fucking child porn on their Twitter?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you can't really give the benefit of the doubt anymore.
I'm also...
Furthermore, when asking around, I found out the person that initially went to Blaze about this all, Turn of the TV, didn't really give Blaze the substantial evidence to prove CK's guilt, something that she even acknowledges. Now, I'm not saying TV should have directly sent Blaze child pornography. God, no. That'd be irresponsible and illegal of her to do. But at least point him in the direction of the retweets, or kind of do what I did in screen capping and keeping some aspects censored. Otherwise, yeah, it becomes no wonder why Blaze would be less willing to remove someone who he considers a friend from his chats on a mere allegation. Yeah, he probably should have actually looked into it, because in this sense he's much like Morgan. However, I have less ire towards Blaze about this whole ordeal now knowing this knowledge because you guys didn't seem to relay the clearer message to him. This lack of clarification came in the form of that final stretch where they told Blaze to leave the community after the call, to which he understood as, he should leave the call now, to which some people in there called it a rage quit. Like, are you for fucking real, guys?
I never the front is imposter. Yeah.
Repeat that, you were cutting off for me.
I am SK Smith, and also leave the server after this call is finished.
Sorry, you really need to change your mic sensitivity because you keep cutting off. Like, I'm getting what you're saying, but... Did anyone else get that?
I got the part about leaving the server after this call, which, I mean, I'm not against, considering the people you align yourself with. I say leave this server that has minors in it.
I say leave the community.
Yeah, that too.
Absolutely. Like, why?
Like, I understand leaving the server, but that's not important right now.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, okay.
I said it will that's not important right now. What's important is that you didn't do it before!
Okay, Blaze, are you going... how soon are we talking? Like, right after this call? Right now? I think you should do it right now.
Absolutely, you should do it right now.
Or are you going to arbitrarily schedule it, like, everything?
Okay.
Okay, what? Are you gonna do it now, or...?
What? Well,
He
we got a fucking answer. He just fucking left.
Well, that's all she wrote.
Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me?
I was not done. I don't think we were done interrogating that. What the fuck?
My God!
Leave the community.
He fucking rage quit. That's the funniest thing ever.
You literally told him to leave. And when he asked for clarification, you told him to leave again. What do you mean it was a rage quit? It's downright concerning how borderline vindictive some of you guys get when you're angry at a person. And again, I want to stress, I wasn't happy with Blaze either. But you guys would rather an execution in exile over someone understanding where they went wrong and maybe, you know, growing from it? I remember a few times this happened in the past too, like, that part's not exactly a new ordeal since I recall the day Slayer got in trouble in the Cloud Palace over his rampant defense of Gale Force. Or Guru making horrid statements about PTSD back in the day. Or what of Ephraim, who, yeah, might still say a stupid thing here or there, ultimately hasn't repeated his worst behaviors after we sat him down and just talked to him. We've seen this method work time and time again, but sometimes it feels as if that method doesn't really sink in with people because we come back to square one rather constantly, and it gets a little frustrating. Is it because it doesn't always work out? Is it because of people like Bomaratsu who seem to not want to listen to anyone after making a knee-jerk video on Lio Convoy and Hopeless Peaches? Accusing them of the same shit the Fox Mafia had prior?
Hi, this is going to be a mess to talk about. I'm a part of a community that has recently discovered Hopeless Peaches and Leo Convoy through Neko Coda, a situation that our community has. Long one.
Actually, on that note, I think I'd like to touch on this video because while this particular example is rather young, Ratsu is a different situation entirely, and it can be one that can kind of tie back into a problem the SCC as a whole will sometimes face from time to time. And it's frankly one that's downright embarrassing for us to face given the very nature of this hobby we've taken up. Okay, so you know how what we, even as slideshow commentators, do is critique and debate videos that we disagree with or find problems in? You know how we'll sometimes get on people's cases for not researching things before they speak on it? Yeah, like, do your research was like a whole meme in the SCC in 2016, and I get that some of y'all might not remember that since a lot of y'all are new faces that post-date the Alt-CC era, but even without that, we still tell people to do even a modicum of research when something is this easily debunkable. So, why is it that sometimes y'all won't even do a lick of research yourselves? Or will dive into a situation, jump to a conclusion at the first sign of something being up, and point fingers without proper information given? Like, doesn't that go against the whole point of commentary? Like, for instance, and again this is a minor one, Ratsu here says that the SCC was introduced to Lio Convoy from Neko Coda. But not only was Coda not the first SCC member Lio had to deal with, since he was one of the two who initially drove V Omega out of this community, but a lot of us, when dealing with Sherman doxing us in Premier Chats, wound up getting into contact with him through that. Ratsu could have known this if she just asked, but she didn't. She just came in here first 17 seconds and fed what is technically misinformation to her audience, and mind you, this is of the tame stuff.
And so on. I want to be clear, I love the slideshow community. However, dismissing actual victims of grooming and downplaying their stories is not okay. I want to be very clear with that.
Are you trying to insinuate the SCC doesn't? Like, really? The 200 plus page Ray Kohai documents, the V Omega exposés, the shit that just happened in Nexus involving Habit, RCV, and Morgan, and Blaze? Another situation you made a video about, mind you? Are you really trying to insinuate the SCC doesn't take grooming allegations seriously? For fuck's sakes, the SCC was willing to completely ostracize Horus Tome for that very thing, and the allegations against them were dubious at best. That's not even mentioning the likes of people like Karome, or Limbo, or Paradox Philosopher, or really anyone that tried to mess with Umbrus in her kid years. The SCC by this point has a history with finding out and dealing with our creeps, and when we do, everyone within the community becomes aware of those actions. So, where is this idea coming from that we don't?
However, Hopeless Features and Leo Convey have decided to not only dismiss and downplay these victims and their stories, but also make them about themselves. Context, a person on Twitter has decided to come out with a document documenting their stories with a person known as Miles. Miles has, as of right now, at least 21 victims. The entire document has not been finished, but the victim who has been working on it, has still working on it.
Well, that's a red flag in of itself. Don't you think a document should be finished before it goes out to the public? Like, an unfinished allegations doc might not have all the evidence needed, or might not be coherently corroborated. Like, I don't know, is that wrong to say? Is that out of pocket? Now, mind you, I don't know if this one did. When trying to look into everything for this video, the doc was put on lockdown and a bunch of tweets about it were deleted, so it doesn't exactly instill confidence, but you know what? Maybe it did. I can't exactly say one way or another. What I can say is, however, that at least on Lio's end, a lot of his problems were the misuse of phrasing, the lack of proper evidence on the doc's end, and just the general mishandling of the doc to begin with. This isn't downplaying anything. If the document in question lacked proper evidence and only went off of someone apologizing for grooming under potential pressure to, then yeah, that's not proper evidence, and we in the SCC have seen that on a couple of occasions. Horus, Spocter, even, so you should know better than to just go off of that line of reasoning. Mind you, Ratsu themselves doesn't give any evidence of this happening either, so at face value alone, we shouldn't take her word on this very seriously. This is again something that Ratsu should know better than to do, but as we see, it is clear as day that she doesn't. She doesn't take this as seriously as she claims. She doesn't want to put in the effort of making an allegation against those she believes are in the wrong. Good going.
Lio and Peaches know about this now. I know we use Leo Conway for ourselves to have long talks, and that's fine. However, I have a problem with this because Leo Conway has allegations of him wanting to see a child get essayed on camera, and Helpless Peaches has decided to ask a minor to blackmail an anonymous person's personal info without asking permission from either of the victims.
And where's the evidence to either of these claims? I at least know the Lio allegation, but were this the first I heard of it, I'd want receipts. Furthermore, I know that's not what happened. I've seen the out-of-context clip, and I've seen the extra context. Miora sent it to me shortly after my video on her. Wish I had the foresight to download it, though. But in short, the victim was already being abused, and Lio recommended catching the abuser on camera so they can send it off to the police. And this is further corroborated in Lio's video on Cass Warfox.
Such as these two claiming I took Mint in when they were 16 years old, despite contradicting the very public fact that we didn't even know about Vita's actions at that time. Neora would also go on to claim that I wanted this assault victim to record their own assault for personal gratification. which is a very screwed up and twisted delusion to run with. Niora and Cash prove this with a recording of me suggesting Mint put surveillance up due to the police not doing anything and them being underage at the time so they couldn't run away. Anything recorded would be shown to the police, not me. Cass and Niora, as well as Foxton and Grimskull, run around laughing about this. They all make Mint's sexual abuse a joke and share how these guys believe it would be sexually gratifying to watch. Which doesn't surprise me due to how all these people openly fantasize about other sexual assault victims being raped, all for a shot at me. You'd think a predator hunter would know it isn't going to get to me as much as it will the very victim they're pretending to care for. It's not like they're checking in on Mint. No, instead they're looking for dirt on him too.
Now, do I think this is the best way to go about something like this? Maybe, maybe not. Though I can't deny it would be great evidence against the abuser. It is a bit of a weird thing to suggest recording what amounts to CP, but I get the idea and it's not what the Fox Mafia seems to claim it as. Especially when you hear the full context, which again, don't have, because I didn't really think I was ever going to need to talk about the Fox Mafia ever again. Boo on me. Also, just generally giving credence to any rumor spread by Fox Mafia is dangerous, because while I don't know everything about them and my last dance into their situation wasn't the best, what I have learned is that a lot of them seem to spread, we'll say, false information about Lio and his friends. Myself apparently now included amongst that list. Apparently. Regardless, you probably should be looking into things generally to see if they're even valid to begin with. But it's even more so important when the people in question have been proven to be rather disingenuous. By the way, this does go to myself. Like, people do claim that I'm dishonest from time to time, and I'll fully admit there are moments where I just fuck up. Even in my proudest videos, I'm not perfect. So I do try to make sure I cite as much as I can so people can double check my work, because, hey, if you do think I'm dishonest, it's better you see where that logic comes from so as to better call me out on things that I'm wrong about. That's all I'm saying. Especially if you're a commentator, because, like, that's the whole point of what we do, right? Like, if you're not looking into a situation and just taking the allegations all at face value, you're kind of going against the very fundamentals of commentary. This goes to the Cloud Palace as well. Like, as mentioned before, there was a whole discussion about an artist on Twitter called Taco Draws, where one admittedly poorly tweet got people thinking that they were into incest. Like, there's a point where that kind of allegation is okay, but we were nowhere near it.
Also, asking one of the victims to make a video when they don't want it to be released, and you decide it was a great idea to just dismiss the victims out loud.
Again, Lio didn't do that. In fact, when looking at what remnants are left, it seemed like Lio and Peaches themselves were going to do a video on the document, after looking at the allegations that were already made public. When people jumped on their case because apparently the doc creators wanted it to be dealt with privately, Lio makes note that the Google Doc was made public already. If anything, Lio was pressuring the doc maker to fucking get better evidence against their alleged groomer, something that one replier was quick to note wasn't fair for some reason, because, like, again, yeah, if the doc wasn't finished, why was it put out? God, this is fucking stupid.
I do not support that. I don't want to support any of that. And I know that maybe Lio was probably taken out of context. I don't know. I believe in things a lot quicker and I stick to our side. It's probably because I like to respect the victims and their stories rather than dismiss them entirely.
Then you know what you can do? Verify the information being given. Look, Ratsu, you already brought up the possibility that Lio is taken out of context here, yet you don't want to confirm whether or not he actually was? If those who are making the doc are accusing Lio of something falsely, then you further spreading that false information is irresponsible. You should be ashamed to put this video out there. I don't care that you're 17, you're making this decision knowingly and willingly. At least when Umbrus did stupid shit as a kid, it was ignorant and she very clearly didn't know better being in a toxic group of friends that she was in, but you do not have that excuse when you acknowledge the possibility of potentially doing the exact thing Lio is allegedly accusing the doc makers of doing.
You do you, man. I don't know. So what am I gonna do? I'm thinking of taking a short hiatus. Not from YouTube, more from my community and from what I've seen. As I need to calm myself down. And I need to focus on colleges. Goodbye.
Then Ratsu goes back to low-key accusing the SCC of being okay with grooming. And look, I don't want to be mean to a 17-year-old, but Stay gone, at least until you're old enough to handle this stuff. Like, you have shown you are willingly ignorant and do not care to actually fix that problem, and it is a little bit infuriating. Like, considering Ratsu is not alone in this same kind of behavior, what the heck is wrong with the rest of y'all? Am I really gonna have to take a step back, look at this community, and ask why you guys hate research so much? Like, really? Look, I'm not asking for the rest of you in this community to just leave, alright? Like, I know you guys can all do better. I don't want you guys thinking that this message comes from a place of bad faith, or me losing my marbles after 2 weeks of solitude. I mean, the lattermost is probably a factor, but it's definitely not why I'm here scolding y'all today as much as I am. I'm making this video because it's one that frankly needs to be made. I don't expect the community to be perfect. I don't expect us to get it right 100% of the time. But with everything I've lined out for you today, you can see that this is a pattern of behavior that we just need to sit down, really process, internalize, and work to better ourselves from moving forward. And while I do think Ratsu needs time to grow, probably away from the community, normally just leaving doesn't give you that chance to grow. In fact, normally leaving when there's a big problem that needs fixing instead of trying to address it in yourselves and others only really guarantees that the SCC cannot get better as a community. It's why when people left the community during the Alt-CC drama of 2017, they were seen as either cowards or don't actually care about this community because, to put it bluntly, they were, and they didn't. They would have rather created a separate hierarchy or gone independent than try to address the problems within the community they'd cared to join from the beginning. They'd rather disassociate, but keep doing the things that would get them lumped in with us anyway, specifically so they could deflect any community criticisms or pretend like they were above them all. That's also generally kind of how I feel about people who do that nowadays. I look at someone like, as an example, A Justice, who explicitly left because of the Cloak and Dagger situation, and just have to ask, why? You see that the community is willing to control a situation or rectify an obvious problem, yet you choose to leave it? Like, are you afraid of something? Are you worried you might be next? If it was just demotivation hitting or burnout causing you to leave, those are both perfectly reasonable reasons to maybe leave. Hell, even when drama is involved, if there's a massive problem with the community as a whole and toxicity, you could maybe just have a justifiable reason to leave then, but the mere act of there being drama giving you reason to disband is rather silly when every community will have it from time to time. Dramas are practically unavoidable, and when the drama in question is being actively taken care of by people who give a fuck, what does that say about you, Justice? Especially when you give the message that you would like to come back to commentaries, but merely as an independent. To clarify, I am not calling A Justice a creep or anything like that. I don't know him that well to say as such. I do know he had a thing with Pokesonic, but I don't know how much more it was than just a couple of admittedly skeety messages, but either way I won't call him a creep. I don't know him enough to say as such, but what I am saying is the implications to his actions are definitely something people will take notice of, whether he likes it or not. Where I try to give him the most benefit of doubt, maybe it's a trust thing, like having Key, Tippy, and others betray his trust. He doesn't know how much more he could trust the rest of the community to not follow suit, and given people like Sean Sampson and Sonic Ward, who we found out as I was scripting this video did the same thing that Tippy did in keeping a predator around, I guess I wouldn't blame him too much then, but, I mean, he wouldn't have known that last one, so still looking at him a bit cross-eyed. But whatever. The point is, leaving this community doesn't help create change, and so the last thing I'd want is for people to just leave it at the first sign of mass community-wide critique from one of its bigger names. We all play a part in this community, and so it is on each and every one of us to acknowledge and work to better ourselves moving forward. Though, with that in mind, I suppose if you cannot handle the critique, maybe it is best you go. Who knows? We've certainly seen our fair share of commentators who are so adverse to getting critique, but happily willing to give it, that it puts into question why they're even here to begin with. But I know those who I'm directing this at can do better. Those within this community can handle it pretty well, so I'm expecting great things to come from this video. Or at least, I hope so. So, I do stand by everything I have said in this video thus far. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have put it into the video if I didn't. We should discuss with each other when problems arise. We should be more concise in what it is we are saying when we have these discussions, and good God, some of us really do need to keep our anger in check. That is all true. But I do worry about the other big issue this community has had since I joined it. For as long as I've been around the community, the SCC had gotten the pretty invalid criticism of being a hive mind or a hierarchy of some sort. These things I do not in the slightest believe was actually valid if you sat down and watched more of us than just a few names. We have always been ones to call each other out and do commentaries on one another. That's just a part of the culture of the SCC at this point. But that said, looking at the history of the SCC and viewing it from a more objective lens, there has kind of been a pretty bad habit of creating gospel, I guess? Like, we're not a hive mind, but we do create our echo chambers, is what I'm trying to say. For instance, we can look back as far as 2016 when the rise of calling out the Tukukui fallacy was in vogue. Or, as we put it, hypocrisy doesn't make you wrong. A sentiment that, while is true, only really served as an argument against those who would use hypocrisy as their only form of argumentation. Because when Redin, Rachel, and I had used that argument the first time, we were under the presumption that our target, hardcore kid, was only focusing on the hypocrisy of Kablam Bandicoot 64 and nothing else. And at that point, why are you even making a commentary when literally all you're going to say is, you're a hypocrite? At least that was the line of logic at the time. This had the SCC catch on to that argument specifically and started applying it rampantly to just any instance of hypocrisy being called out, which grew that echo chamber to be louder and louder until calling out hypocrisy was just no longer a thing you could do in the SCC. That is until the pushback era started, where calling out a Tukukui was met with the resounding cries of, "But it does make you a hypocrite," a statement that is also true, and was used as a reactive to an argument that was progressively becoming more and more a problem as time persisted. And then that echo chamber grew louder and louder until we got to the point where Rachel, who was one of the initial 3 to call out the Tukukui, started rambling about the modes of persuasion in commentaries. Oh, how it comes full circle, am I right? This is a problem that the SCC has had forever that I like to dub overcorrection. Never mind how overcorrection is a real thing in surgery and therapy, let me feel smart for once. In this scenario, it's a point of extreme where you fix an issue so much that it creates a situation where the fix to the problem becomes the problem in of itself. And there are plenty of examples of this throughout the SCC's history. From the aforementioned Tukukui Seesaw, to Black Borders Matter, where the criticism of render your video in 16:9 instead of 4:3 became don't have a solid colored background ever. ImageGate, where there was an argument of whether or not it was okay to use a one-picture avatar. The Great Attitude Shift of 2019, where the Cloud Palace's video on the Cam project became a whole ordeal because people who were usually pretty hostile in their videos called it too mean. Point is, we've had a number of these, and I worry if I release this video without addressing this, that people are going to become too confrontational, or too okay with degenerate behavior, and neither of which are ideal outcomes. So I want to further clarify what it is that I expect from this video by the end of it all, and what we should do when approaching situations of any sort going forward. So first I want to outline what it is we'd be looking for in this kind of context, and what generally to identify, using someone who is in just about every situation mentioned in this video as an example. Let's turn our attention towards Umbrus. Now, I want to be very clear out of the gate. I know she's 18. She's still growing, and I shouldn't expect her to deal with every situation in the best way possible. I don't. However, she is the single best example of how we in the SCC could overcorrect ourselves and make the solution to these situations into the problems on their own. To start, let's head back to the Blaze call one more time, because there was a point in there where Umbrus had said something that I took contention with.
Since the topic of TSCC was brought up, or whatever the fucking hellhole was named, I'm gonna be real, Blaze. You keep talking to me about how you really enjoyed my presence as an admin there. You did nothing but disrespect me throughout my entire time being there, whether it was the aforementioned stuff with Limbo where you didn't care, but also you let people spread lies about me, which, if you want to be reminded, the initial Limbo stuff, as well as the time the Conundrum tried to start a smear campaign over the Paradox situation. But then again, You're the same person who encouraged arguments in that chat. You're the one who loved dramas happening. I'll never forget the time Joshua was doing his nonsense, and you had to ask if he should be banned. I don't care if you give benefit of the doubt. I give benefit of the doubt to people who deserve it.
Except Umbrus and I both know that this was not true. Umbrus has not always given people the benefit of doubt. In fact, earlier just that year, Umbrus had turned people against a commentator by the name of Buggy Boy after they left the Cloud Palace in January that year, instantly going on to spread rumors and gossip of Buggy being ableist, talking shit about other people behind the scenes, and ultimately just being a fucking dick about everyone in there. Umbrus made it seem like he was doing it on his own accord and condemning him every step of the way, which already was strange, seeing as Buggy was like a child, still is as of this video. He's, I think, the youngest member in the SCC we currently have. I mean, he definitely was at the time, if nothing else. So this could just be a case of edgy teen being an edgy teen. It's not that big of a deal. He'll grow. And I had to tell Umbrus as such, which, given her history in the SCC, I really shouldn't have to have. But it got worse when Buggy asked for a courthouse call to shine a light on behaviors that Umbrus just so happened to omit from situations. Turns out that Umbrus was also partaking in these behaviors and further encouraging Buggy to continue them.
I do want to preface this by saying I was kind of a shithead for a while. I can't even lie. I did do some me and Umbrus both shit talked to some of you guys. Not really. It was mainly Key, I'm gonna be honest. Which is really funny looking back.
Can confirm.
It was kind of getting to a point where I guess someone in another server, it's the Arab server, Bennett, hi Marwan, it was in the Arab server, someone had brought up a different situation regarding a different person, and how people in that server kind of egged them on to kind of just make fun of them. And then Umbrus agreed with them, saying, "Oh yeah, the shit talking, it's gotta stop, guys." And she brought up a situation with a guy called Zach who was in her server, and how we were like, a lot of us were shit talking him, and that me and another person called Jake in the server were like suggesting to kick him. I called that out because it was not really an appropriate example, because Umbrus was one of the people mainly talking about him at the time. She would go into VCs and go into the vent chat and just talk about him all the time. So I didn't really like that. And we only suggested to kick him because this was after months of like her coming to us and like bickering about him, after we already just like didn't really like him. Let me think. Also, Umbrus was one of the biggest contributors. I just want you guys to think about that for a second.
And I will admit that wholeheartedly.
And it kind of came off as trying to vilify me and Jake to the other people in the server, because it looks like we were the ones mainly shit-talking them, when we weren't. Umbrus was the one bringing him up most of the time. And I will admit, though, I did probably bring him up, like, sometimes on the off chance, because, as I said before, I was kind of the shithead. But we did have a discussion about this. We did talk about this. And she also brought up me making fun of triggers in, I think, her chat, but she left out in the conversation how she was egging me on, and she encouraged me to this was in a VC, by the way. She was encouraging me to keep going on these people, and also chimed in with her own little quips. And to other people in the server, it would come off like I was the one doing this out of nowhere, that I was the one just making fun of people's triggers for no reason, even though she was literally there. And I have the direct quote right here. It says, "In hindsight, you making fun of my triggers chat was fucked up." And that got me pissed, because to the other people in the server, it would look really bad. Because it is, but she was leaving herself out of the equation, and kind of just tried to like get out of it. She said she never specified that she wasn't a part of it, even though inherently it implies that only I was doing it, which is just something that kind of pissed me off then. But by the end, we all agreed that, oh yeah, we kind of need to shit talk less. I agreed with that, Umbrus agreed with that, rest of the server agreed with that. Whatever, all was good. Nothing happened for like a month, I'm pretty sure. And then out of nowhere, I get this message. I wake up at like 2 a.m. in the morning. I see a message sent at like 10 p.m. And it's like a huge paragraph, like cutting me off. Let me read some of my footnotes here. Here's, I think I should have it right here. Where'd I put it? Let me get it. It is this. That's fine, Mo. So, as you can, I'll get to my response in a second, but I do kind of want to point out how. Oh, give me a sec. So I want to bring up how like out of nowhere this was. Of course, I didn't know how to respond because first of all, it was 2 a.m. But second of all, by this point, Umbrus had already removed me as a friend, kicked me out of her server, left like pretty much every other server I was in. So I didn't know what to do. And afterwards, like after all the stress had like subsided, I got really mad because Umbrus had these reasons. She put these out there. And these were the exact same things that I had already said prior, or that we had already discussed prior in January. So, you know, that's obnoxious, that's annoying. That she would do this, not even communicate to me at all if I had done something wrong. And just use this sort of sentimental type bullshit to be like, oh, we're just on different paths for right now. It's so obnoxious to see that when I don't even know what I did wrong. And I still don't know what I did wrong.
Now ain't that some shit? That doesn't seem like any benefit of doubt. You just threw another person under the bus because of behaviors you both contributed to. Benefit of doubt would be acknowledging your involvement and letting up on Buggy for their problems. Or what of the hypochromia call that followed in its wake, where Umbrus did the exact same thing with a different kid who eventually wanted to talk things out with her. Still need to find that call and archive it. Got a few of them I still need to, but whatever. Umbrus kept receipts on individuals, waited until they were no longer in earshot, and then spread them like wildfires to other people in the community. Thankfully, she was chewed out for that behavior, but she hasn't seemed to learn because we still had that situation with Mr. A where Umbrus tried dredging up a situation from 2020 that Mr. A most likely wasn't involved with to make him look worse than he actually was. This was exactly why I was more prone to believe Mr. A over Umbrus in this scenario, because when someone has an established pattern of behavior of exaggerating or outright lying about a situation involving someone she takes issue with, then yeah, that's going to put into question just how credible Umbrus's accounts tend to be. At least without evidence, which usually she does have, but in this scenario she didn't. I know that's probably not what anyone wants to hear, but it's unfortunately the reality of the matter. That said, the situation between Buggy and the situation between Mr. A are two extreme halves of a whole problem. With Buggy, the problem therein lied with the omission of information and details, whereas Mr. A is the addition of old or irrelevant information. She course-corrected a little too far, being more willing to share tons of information about a person exactly when they're in the most trouble. Another thing you could probably contribute to the conversation with Neko Shadows that started the whole ordeal, to be honest. Let me put it this way. Umbrus, when we had the call between the two of them, was going to sidetrack us all the way back to 2020 specifically to talk about the situation she never even proved Mr. A was actually a part of. And not only did we not actually know if Mr. A was a part of her abuse or not, it just wasn't relevant to the situation. The specific event was about Mr. A's unwillingness to talk things out with Umbrus when he absolutely should have, and instead opted into talking shit behind the scenes where she specifically couldn't see or defend herself. Not that Mr. A was acquiescent in abuse. Plus, again, there is the question of why this was never brought up to begin with if it was truly something she wanted to talk about. The notion that Umbrus merely brought this extra bit up as an attempt to bring up any old information with Mr. A while he was being grilled for his lack of communication isn't really that far-fetched of an idea, nor is it the only time we've seen Umbrus overcorrect behavior to try and match the environment of behavioral correction. This was another situation that happened while I was out of commission. My computer was busted and I wasn't really able to control what was going on, but I did watch this one happen in real time. So, occasionally, and not to out him like this, but it is important for context, occasionally Fractured Light will have these episodes where he starts self-deprecating or self-destructing. He needs a hug and a therapist is what I'm trying to say, and I do hope that one day he can get that help. But the story isn't about him. He was just kind of the one that got the ball rolling. So Light had one of those moments in courthouse, claiming that he was finding himself relapsing into bad behaviors again. And the rest of the courthouse who were there told him to take a break because he had been under a lot of stress. And it seemed like he was. When I popped up, we did kind of switch the conversation to how I was doing at the time, to which the answer was, worried about some data I forgot to back up for a future video that I want to do. Luckily, that data was okay, but God was I worried like crazy. Anyway, eventually, Light went back to spiraling, and eventually decided to leave the chat. That's when I mentioned that if Light decided he wanted to come back to the chat, I wouldn't be able to bring him back. Enter Toganium, who didn't read and thought that I was talking about Blaze the movie fan, who, mind you, wasn't a part of discussion prior to this, so I am a bit confused as to how he got that idea. But either way, Umbrus fucking snaps at him over this, specifically jumping on his case for misunderstanding of what was happening. All Toga was doing was asking questions for clarification, and while yes, he could have backread the chat, I think this reaction was downright uncalled for, and seeing people like Slumber, MTR, and Zoranthropy jump in on this to assist in the crucifixion of one guy who was asking for clarification that, mind you, apparently other people also needed, is fucking insane. Stardust, who agreed that the reaction was a bit much, still clarifies that Toga shouldn't have been meaning the miscommunication. But the cat image was directed at Umbrus's visceral reaction, as it was overblown and too quick to anger. He was not meaning Fractured Light's meltdown in the chat, and that's where the disconnect seemed to develop, because the whole discussion warped around Toga's meme posting. The singular image after he was already getting chewed out over not backreading. I don't know if I can stress enough just how absolutely insane this situation was. Now, yes, Toga did go on to make a rather guilt-trippy response, I'm not going to ignore that, but the fact that a simple misunderstanding was met so viscerally and so aggressively was not at all okay. Miroki came in with a message condemning everyone except Umbrus, saying that this didn't need to be a 20-car pileup it wound up being, but Miroki seemed to ignore the initial reactions came from Umbrus. She was the one who started this pile-on, and dismissing her involvement in all of this doesn't really make sense as someone who was also watching this happen. Now with that in mind, I do have to give Miroki some props, as they were the loudest voice of reason in this argument, trying to defuse the situation when it appeared to get more heated. Ephraim and Cherry Blossom also being very honorable mentions, trying to be there for Toga when he seemed to feel unwanted, but still acknowledging the problems that he had, being that he can be a bit annoying at times. The situation wrapped up pretty quickly after that, but even progressing past that point, you can see everyone was starting to wake up to what might have been happening. Those who partook in the dogpiling starting to realize that they were too quick to hostility. Those who were bystanders realizing that there might be a problem with people being a little too jumpy. Miroki even calls it overcorrecting in the conversation. I'm not kidding when I said that this was a video in the works for a while. I completely forgot this was mentioned. But this air of people taking a step back and actually internalizing what went wrong started rushing over the chat as a wake-up call to the problems that we had started facing. Here's the thing. Yes, it absolutely makes sense as to why we're so on guard right now. By this point in the timeline, we just finished Cloak and Dagger and the Morgan and Blaze stuff. Tensions were high, as no one knew who to trust anymore. So, it was ever the more important that we take this step back and look at the bigger picture. Look, I don't want to hammer home just how much the SCC really needs this growing period. It's been in its growing pains for too long. From its inception and people doxing and hacking one another, to the ImSkull blow-up in 2013, the Ray Kohai era where we were just okay with casual transphobia, ableism, and racism, and the god knows how many paradigm shifts we've had since 2019. I'm glad we're taking this responsibility seriously, and we have been keeping up with that to the best of our abilities, even post all the situations I've talked about today. Going back to the main point of this chapter, overcorrection is something that we should be more careful not to fall into. While we should discuss our problems with each other, nobody likes those who are too confrontational about every minute thing that is disagreeable. I mean, nobody enjoyed V Omega after a while they were actually in the SCC, and that's to say nothing of the countless other examples we have. We should be more concise in our critiques of people, but elaboration is still important, and stories and anecdotes do occasionally have their place in discussion. Some of us should keep our anger in check, but sometimes it's justified. And calling out aggressive anger where it is justified just winds up being some tone policing bullshit, and no one likes a spotter. These are just a few examples, mind you. There are so many more we could probably call to and explain where the problems with overcorrection could have arisen, but I think the point has been made enough. Nuance is important, and I know that's hilarious to say on an internet that frequently lacks it, but it is. Nuance is what prevents us from looking at everything in black and white. Nuance is what keeps us from applying one's fix to every situation. Nuance is just a key factor to argumentation to begin with, because otherwise one's stringent morals may wind up contradicting actions that need to be taken in a different situation. So this is something we need to be very careful about moving forward. You need to be able to read a situation and understand how to approach it in a specific way if it needs special treatment. You need to be able to take specific action when specific action is needed. You can't just autopilot everything, because it won't always work like that. It applies to real-life laws, so it definitely applies to internet situations. And I know just saying figure it out yourselves is kind of underwhelming and not the most productive, but it's unfortunately the only way to put it. And even with that in mind, I'm not saying figure it out yourselves in a literal sense, because you can ask others for assistance. I'm not stupid. Well, okay, I'm not that stupid, but figure it out in the sense that every situation is different. As of scripting this video, there have been so many other discussions and situations that we have had to deal with. You had a situation with Destroyer Shy where they didn't respect the boundaries of Fractured Light, and that was a whole ordeal. You had the Sean Sampson, Sonic Ward, and Kyokun sequel to Cloak and Dagger where we found out Sean was at one point still in contact with the Predator, even knowing their predatory history. Ephraim finally got a bit of vindication and talked to Space Guru 5 about his spreading of that false information about a situation that I mentioned earlier. We've been seeing the Purely Odd Grandmaster start to clean house and remove people who've been a little too comfortable around individuals who are frankly the worst. We are waking up to the existence of problematic people in the SCC, and we're just trying our best to weed them out. No help from those who initially left and just said we were harboring criminals without naming names. You know who you are. Madison, Gwis, Jorm. Just saying, we could have been dealing with this shit a lot faster if y'all weren't disingenuous cowards. Anyway, pettiness aside, the gravity of people's actions are starting to be understood. We're starting to give consequences to those who deserve it, and you know, that's the best anyone could ask of this niche little community of nerds. That said, I hope we don't wind up falling the other way, where every little grievance becomes a cancelable offense. I don't wish for us to be the DA ranting community too, or a subsection of the ARC commentators where that shit happened more egregiously, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't want that either. It's important that this doesn't become the outcome of this new era, because that would be the fast track to community extinction. Or at the least, another 2013, which wouldn't be very much better. I don't know. Overall, I do think this is a pretty good community, and generally, we're the best we've been in a while, and I'd hate to see it fall apart. I know that it hasn't exactly been the most fun to be in, but that can change after our cleanup era. Anyway, I've been rambling for a bit, and as anticlimactic as this chapter is, I've been working on this video far longer than I ever intended to, so I'm gonna try to wrap up this video. So, yeah, I was hoping to get this video out, like, maybe within the week of my worst of the year. We're almost out of January now. Look, it's a roundabout way of saying this, but I don't think anyone is a bad person because of these issues. It's just things we need to work on collectively. So as rich as it is to hear me say, no self-deprecating about this, everyone's guilty of it, but we can all get better at it together. I don't want to be the SCC's babysitter or mother forever. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that I was never y'all's caretaker. I'm a newly 27-year-old shut-in with no life experience that doesn't touch grass because I'm too terminally online. Are you kidding? I ain't equipped for kids. I have my own problems like everyone else does. I crack under pressure, I struggle to compose myself at times, and, as stated before, I tend to get lost in unimportant details. And that's just the immediate issues I can pick up offhand. Never mind how many people tend to notice I don't really assert myself and get talked over in calls, like, constantly, so I can only have so much room to speak myself. I just think that we need to re-examine how we approach these kinds of things, is all I'm saying, because while away, I was just forced to overlook everything as a third party. I wasn't in the moment with everyone, and as such, I was left to analyze and criticize on my own, which might have been for the better, might have been for the worse, who knows. I'll let you guys decide yourselves whether I covered these situations well or not. As much of my criticism doubles as my 2 cents retrospectively. But then, how would we go about changing this? I can't just say that we're all terrible at communication and then do nothing in the realms of outlining how to fix these things after all, so what do I think we should do? Admittedly, that's a bit of a harder thing to grasp, but to be honest, much of us can already pinpoint the problems with our approaches to things. In fact, I hear of a lot of y'all, like damn near every single one of you, at one point or another, realize your own shortcomings after standing back and re-examining things, so you guys already can realize the problems, but rarely do any of us seem to really internalize it and change that approach. So basically, my first order of business is if you can realize something is a problem, internalize that a bit more. Don't just say something's an issue and then do nothing to try and change trajectory. Believe it or not, I do try to do that all the time when I realize something is a problem. I mean, look at me in 2018 versus how I am post-confessions. And yeah, results may vary. Rome wasn't built in a day. I don't expect everyone to just magically get better after my video gets posted, but oftentimes it feels as if those who feel the need to change the most do the least to actually do so. Now, that's a behavioral thing. That's something you guys should work on anyways as humans, regardless if it was a problem in the community or not. Becoming the best versions of ourselves is kind of what we strive for. Now, the more important aspect to this video is how little we actually communicate, and how we go about communicating, because, my god, people need to start talking to each other when there's an issue. Lyle got all of the children together in one call and try to outline what needs to be done in the event a predator is found within the community, and much of that resulted in just telling someone, as it is important to do so.
Alright, Aaron. I've had you guys gathered here today for a very specific incident, and despite how I just started that, no, I am not wedding any of you people together with each other. More importantly, we have noticed a bit of a consistent pattern here, and I want to be very clear here, it is not the fault of any of the kids involved, but we've had no shortage, at least 3 incidents now, where kids have known about predator or a creep in the community, and they've been convinced by said creeps to be quiet about it. I'm having this conversation with you kids so you guys can understand you don't have to listen to these people, and you shouldn't. If somebody is doing something like that, or you know of anybody who's around these people knowing what they've done, you need to tell us. You need to tell Susie, or you need to tell me. I know some of you are more comfortable with one than the other, but if there's a predator running around, or a creep in general, or a sexual harasser, you gotta let people know. Because you're young, you need to be protected in this community as best as possible, and we're not gonna be able to do that unless we know what's going on. So if we have a situation like that, you need to let us know. You also need to communicate when any adults are saying or doing sexual things around you, because that can lead to other things, or it primes you to get you interested in those things. It's a predatory tactic. It's a grooming tactic. If something feels wrong, or please tell us. We're not going to get mad at you. We're not going to yell at you. We're not going to fuss at you. We want to make sure you guys are okay. Because now we had at least one incident as well where somebody in this community was being preyed upon and nobody said anything about it. Not the people who should have, that were adults. And unfortunately, that means the individual wound up having some terrible things happen to them. And I want to try to avoid that when it comes to you kids, because I care about you. Everybody understand?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We have any questions here?
So as not to endanger those within the community, especially not the children. But this can extend to the adults in this community too. Don't think you guys couldn't get creeped on. When someone like that is in the community, it becomes all of our problem, not just the minors, not just the adults. and this really needs to be hammered home considering how many times we've had situations about this very thing within the past year alone. From Vigelsio and those who kept him silent, Blaze the Movie Fan's SCC command server where he was just super dismissive, and even going into January this year where we found Sean Sampson willingly associating with multiple predators and enablers, and Warden Kyokun should just kinda let that happen. That one might need its own video. I've had a few people say I probably should, so we'll see how that goes. Point is, serious things like that should be taken care of. Be it in a commentary group, go to Efrom and Temporal Times, go to Umbrus and Pog, come to me in the Cloud Palace, you know, just whoever's running the joint, and tell them. Be it in a friend server, tell the admins in there, and hey, if it's the admins that are the issue, tell someone else who can maybe get involved. It seems Lio is willing to stick around this community to try and lend a hand. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, and we do have other courthouse moderators in Jace and Stagmaster, despite my aforementioned concerns with the former. Both want to help, and I'd let them do so. You have options. You have people to turn to. It's maybe high time we start doing so we don't wind up with Cloak and Dagger X, the daggering, or whatever. In fact, for the past 6 years, that's part of the reason the Cloud Palace hasn't had any moderators until, well, after this video, that's still being worked out. But that also extends to Courthouse and Nexus. When I came back, I had a few people jump to ask me about the lack of moderation teams and demanded I fix that before any other situations arise. But I have just spent however long detailing why it has been so hard for me to want to appoint mod teams. I haven't been too sure who to trust myself. It is being worked on now, after all of this has been said and done, but you guys really do need to do your due diligence as well. This also goes without saying by this point in this video, but this does extend to the lesser problems in the community as well. Those who just kind of have bad tendencies but aren't actually doing anything criminal, such be the Mr. A situation, or the Donnie and Avi situation, or Destroyer Shy, or... You know, there's far too many to count. You've certainly seen these situations by this point. I don't think they bear repeating. In these situations, talking it out with the opposing party becomes a necessity if you want anything fixed. And if they choose not to listen to you or want to be difficult, we now have the courthouse for this exact thing. While I would prefer you guys talking about the smaller things amongst yourselves, we can use it for such. At the end of the day, we need to start talking to each other as adults, because most of you are. Unless you're a child, then... I mean, we need to handle you more tactfully, because that's another thing that Lio has definitely criticized this community of, and it's also something that I'd started thinking about within my own content years ago, being that we will sometimes tackle a kid when it is not necessary. Ratsu is a decent example of this, though I won't pretend like I don't get it. The way that they were handled in POG was atrocious, but they also didn't exactly help matters. Otherwise, Umbrus' situations with Hypo and Buggy will do fine as examples. Even if she was herself rather young, she still treated those younger than her far worse in spreading the allegations and rumors she did. Like, I don't know. After the Halo Miranda Wars, I would think maybe we would have passed the point where we're treating every child like a soccer ball. Maybe that's just me, though. Anyway, I got sidetracked. The point is that we kind of need to talk when we have a problem with each other. It doesn't gotta be an argument, it doesn't gotta be a debate to win, just a discussion works fine. And I do mean a discussion, not a public flogging. That Blaze the Movie Fan call was awful. There was a second call with a guy between Ellie, Habit, and Umbrus I haven't mentioned until this point, and it seems like just about anyone not in that first call that heard it feels the same way about it, because Lio called it out in the Senate call, Ellie called it out in the second call, and I'm calling it out here. It wasn't a discussion. You guys just wanted to be Lio on a bad day, which brings me to my next point. The way we talk with each other needs to change too. I get being stern sometimes. Ellie's call was very stern, but was also very productive because she cut to the chase, clarified what needed to be clarified, asked questions, and let Blaze respond.
So I watched your video about the situation, about you messing up, and you didn't actually say what you did. Why is that? You were incredibly vague. You did not go into specifics. You just said, "Oh, I messed up and I'm leaving." That is the crux of what you said. That title of your video could just be what you said. That could have just been like a 2-second video, because the rest of it was kind of just fluff. You didn't actually go into specifics as to what you said. Is it why is that? Why is that?
Okay, there are a couple of reasons as to why. First of the reason why I was being so vague is because I I was in a rush. I want to get this video out as soon as possible because I felt really bad. And I thought that mentioning the name of the victim would be inappropriate. That's why I didn't say his name.
Her name. Or is it she, her?
Yeah, her name. Yeah.
I can correct. I use any all. But I don't prefer being she, her defaulted.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Well, so why didn't you ask the victim? If you cared so much about the victim, why didn't you ask them if that would be okay to mention their name?
I couldn't sites up it already removed me after I left Doodle's server.
But as productive as this call is, it is not the only way a call should be handled. Sometimes, in order to get information and the responses we need, sometimes playing good cop is a requirement. And a good example of that, weirdly enough, comes from the Senate, a group that garnered the reputation of being a bullying server. When we got Blaze in there, Hopeless Peaches chimed in and really walked Blaze through a lot of what needed to be talked about. And while Lio and I were both still there to really sit down and hammer home how much of an issue his dismissive nature can be, Peaches was the one that really got Blaze to talk, and showed how autopiloting to being mean is not always optimal.
Yeah, but you don't want to be stuck in situations like this where you're having to clean up after other people. What you want to do is find yourself some friends who have the same morals as you, who don't do this kind of stuff, so that way you can go and do your own work, you can make whatever movie review you want, and you'll have the options open to you of being able to talk to other people who like the same movies that you do. And then you turn off the internet after you've done all that, and then you pop your feet up, have a brew, and then go to sleep. Rather than having to deal with this stuff.
I want to say something. I do not want to just associate with people who have the same morals as I do. That would be fucking boring. I'm not like Steve Shives. I'd rather have people who are fucking different.
Enough.
Oh, no. Okay,
Enough.
So when I'm saying morals, right, there's different levels, okay?
Right.
So I'm not saying, cut off all people who have slightly different political opinions, let's say, or cut off people who, there's different ways we can, where there's leeway, right? For instance, some people may think differently on taxation or something, or roads, or I don't know why I'm stuck on politics, but it's the only thing I can think of. Different artists, some people prefer traditional art and they may go, I would never touch digital art in my life. I would still be friends with those people. But there's some base morals, right? So base morals are, would you hurt somebody? Would you hurt a child? Would you look at a certain sexual imagery? And these kind of baseline the baseline moral I'm talking about is hurting people. Serious stuff that people from any other, like all groups would say that is wrong. Are you following?
As with a lot of things, as I said before, there's nuance to this level of critique, and you really have to be able to read a person to know how to approach topics and people with different levels of care and reason. As stated before, just going in to antagonize someone will more frequently than not cause that person to not want to listen to your critiques or thoughts because you show that you do not wish to approach a matter in good faith. However, I also acknowledge that it is not always a given, and sometimes people do need their heads bashed in with a metaphorical brick. But I feel like that should be reserved for people who actually deserve it, like a pedophile, or a groomer, or like someone who preys on people in a general sense. Not someone who might not understand the gravity of their actions or act out of impulse. It's something you just kinda have to get a feel for, something to read and to decipher for yourselves. And this goes for anything. Commentaries or discussions. Being able to approach things reasonably is an important skill to have, and once we can finally realize that and learn it, maybe we won't need a follow-up to this video. Anyway, I thank y'all for listening to this video. I'd be lying if I said that this was exactly a fun video to make, or that I'm even going to really like it once it's out. Which is a little counterintuitive to the very thing I mentioned I wanted to go into in 2024, I'm aware. But we needed to tie the loose ends before I could move on to do some of the more fun videos that I want to do. I've got some interesting projects in the future, so if you don't mind me, I'm gonna call that a video. Have a good day, and take care.